Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the London Assembly's plenary meeting. In accordance with government regulations, we are holding this meeting as a virtual meeting with Assembly members and invited guests participating remotely. Can I ask Clerk Rebecca Arnold to confirm the names of the Assembly members who are joining us virtually at this meeting and any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We have with us today Assembly Member Arnold, Assembly Member Bailey, Assembly Member Berry, Assembly Member Boff, Assembly Member Cooper, Assembly Member Desai, Assembly Member Devonish, Assembly Member Dismore, Assembly Member Eshalomi, Assembly Member Gavron, Assembly Member Hall, Assembly Member Curtin, Assembly Member McCartney, Assembly Member Dr Moore, Assembly Member O'Connell, Assembly Member Pidgeon, Assembly Member Qureshi, Assembly Member Russell, Assembly Member Dr Sahota, Assembly Member Arbour, Deputy Chairman, and yourself, Assembly Member Shah, in the chamber. We have apologies from Assembly Member Bacon, and we are expecting Assembly Members Duval, Prince and Whittle to join us shortly.
Thank you. Let's start. I have a couple of updates on recent Assembly activities. Firstly, the London Assembly held an event on Thursday on rough sleeping in London with an expert panel discussing what more needs to be done to help those sleeping around in the capital. This week, the Budget and Performance Committee held two meetings to review the 2021-22 budget plans for the London Legacy Development Corporation, LLDC, and the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation, OPDC, the Metropolitan Police, and the London Fire Brigade. If we move on to declarations of interest, can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out at Agenda Item 2? Agreed?
Noted.
Thank you. Can I ask the Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests or other relevant interests where they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? I believe there are none. So move on to the next item. Minutes. Can I ask the Assembly to confirm the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on 5th of November and the Mayor's Question Time meeting held on 19th of November to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We now move on to today's principal business of the meeting, which is a question and answer session on policing issues in London. Joining us virtually for today's session, and we welcome our guests. They are Mayor of London Sadiq Khan, Dame Cressida Dick, DBE QPM, who is the Commissioner of Metropolitan Police Service, and Sophie Linden, who is the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. Welcome to the meeting, all our guests. There are 4 lead-off questions, and Assembly members may ask supplementary questions after each questions have been answered. Please, could I ask Assembly members to specify who they would like an answer from when they put their questions, and also to ask to mute their microphones when they are not speaking. And request to the guests, would you kindly be succinct when answering the questions, and also this will allow us to get through as many questions as we have for you this afternoon. We will now first receive a short opening statement. Can we begin with Mr. Mayor? Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Assembly members. I'm pleased to join you with the Commissioner, Cressida Dick, and the Deputy Mayor, Sophie Linden, to talk about police and crime and safety in our great city. I want to start by thanking once again the brave officers and staff who work in the Met Police Service to help keep our city safe. This year, and indeed the last few years, have been extremely difficult for London, and I know the heroism and dedication of our police service continues to be a huge source of pride and inspiration to us all. As Mayor, my top priority will always be the safety of Londoners. My focus in recent years has been on tackling violent crime, which leaves lives destroyed and families heartbroken. I'm continuing to work with the police to tackle this problem head-on by ensuring that we're not only being tough on crime, but tough on the causes of crime too. That's why there are over 1,000 more police officers on London streets bearing down on crime than when I first became mayor. It's why we established England's first violence reduction unit to tackle the root causes of crime, and it's why we created the Young Londoners Fund to invest millions of pounds in providing young people with opportunities to get out of gangs and violence and into employment and training. Without excusing criminality, the causes of violent crime are extremely complex. Poverty, inequality, alienation, and a lack of opportunities are all factors. And there's no doubt that the problem has been made far worse by the government's decade of cuts, not only to the police, but to youth and public services across our city too. The truth is that cuts really do have consequences. That's why I've announced this week that we'll be providing additional funding from City Hall to the Met Police Service to protect police officer numbers over the next year. However, we're still facing a huge financial challenge because the government is choosing to implement a new era of austerity in London. It is refusing to refund the money we've spent tackling the pandemic, as well as the crucial income we've lost from council tax and business rates as a result of the economic impact of the pandemic. Now is the time for investment in our police and preventative services, not more cuts. As Mayor, I'll never shy away from making the case and standing up for our police on behalf of Londoners. And I'm grateful to those Assembly members who are supporting us in trying to secure the funding our city needs. Thank you, Chair, and I look forward to answering questions and having a discussion later on during the course of the afternoon.
Commissioner, very welcome. Do you have any opening statement to make?
Thank you very much indeed, Chair, and thank you for inviting me here this afternoon. Well, in a very sad and tough year for our city, 2020 has brought real new challenges for the men and women of the Met. And I echo the Mayor when I say I am extremely proud of the way in which they've risen to those challenges. They've shown great resilience, flexibility, courage, compassion and determination in carrying on and delivering and improving our services, particularly in relation to our number one priority, that is reducing violence, but also taking on an unprecedented role, playing our part in supporting the NHS and helping to keep people safe in a new way for us from the threat of the COVID-19 virus. Met people have worked tirelessly during this year. They've stayed out on the streets as others stayed at home. They've faced new risks in unpredictable and often unknown situations. They've had to adapt to whole new ways of working. They've had to help the public to understand how and when and where to comply with changing regulations. They've upheld the law in a unique context. They've ended up policing some very difficult and violent on occasion protests and unlawful and unsafe events. And of course, they've achieved record results in serious and organised crime against county lines, drug dealing, so many other areas. We'll come back to those in a second. The resilience and achievements of those on the front line have, I must say, been matched by Herculean efforts by those in supporting roles, not something we always talk about with Assembly members. But I include here, of course, those who were shielding, and indeed our contractors, for example, our cleaners have done a fantastic job this year. We've kept driving forward our transformational projects and programmes, and we've continued to innovate. We now have an almost 100% mobile-enabled workforce. We've introduced a whole host of new digital tools this year to speed up and make more effective our forensics, our intelligence, our investigations, other aspects of operations, as well as many back-office functions. We've carried on with our complex multi-year programmes to replace our last, I would probably say, antiquated legacy systems. We've continued to grow. We delivered our uplift of officers early in the year. We're ready to bring in new officers next year under exciting new entry routes. We've continued to improve our estate and the environment in which our staff are working. We've worked ever more closely, I think more closely than ever, with key partners locally, regionally and nationally. And we've improved our standards in a number of areas. Some we'll talk about this afternoon, but perhaps we won't maybe mention financial management so much, data standards and assurance, health and safety, our use of intrusive powers. I could go on, a whole range of areas where I'm confident we have improved our standards. And our strategy, the investment by the government and by the Mayor in policing, and our collective work and the leadership shown by my senior team, I think has led to a very highly engaged workforce despite the challenges of this year. And for the third year in a row, we have an improved staff survey. Of course, for the Met, 2020 will always be remembered by us as the year we lost Matt Rotana, something that sent shockwaves through the service and, of course, well beyond. He was a wonderful guy, wonderful sergeant, wonderful man, and we will go on remembering him. And partly in his memory, we'll go on tackling violent crime. It is our highest operational priority. I know we'll talk about it later on, but we've had some fantastic results this year. We are continuing to focus on the hotspot areas where violence occurs the most. We are going after those we identify as those most dangerous, the most violent people, the prolific knife carriers, the people who target vulnerable young people, the people who run the county lines. We have continued to use all preventative and enforcement tactics and powers available to us. That does, of course, include stop and search, intelligence-led stop and search, and as you know, that as use of a power, which of course causes concern, and we may talk about it this afternoon again, it has led to thousands of weapons being removed from the capital streets. And each one of those weapons might have been one that might have been used in a violent incident, an injury, or even a death. So we'd say we're really tackling the drivers of violent crime. We may talk about county lines. This year we've closed 230 county lines since November. We've had a 78% increase in the number of drug dealers charged this year. It isn't just the headline figures, but the figures behind that we think are really showing a big impact on violent crime on the streets. Of course, this takes strong partnership working. We can often only, frankly, do our enforcement role and then galvanise a response by others. And we are fully committed to an approach which tries to prevent at grassroots level and deal with the complex causes that lead young people in particular into criminality. We'll work through a variety of schemes to give young people different opportunities, different ways, different choices in their lives. And I'd like to finish just by saying that we are, as you know, a community-based police service. As long as I'm Commissioner and many decades afterwards, we will continue to be a community-based, community-focused police service, one which is trained to act proportionately, to engage, to explain and try to resolve situations, to only use force when it is absolutely necessary. Policing, as we've seen this year, is complex and challenging. I believe we've got the finest police service in the world, but we could be stronger, and we are always learning, we're always improving. We're very highly scrutinised, and that is obviously going to continue in the future. It's something we don't flinch on. Obviously, this summer has thrown a light on the relationship between the police and public, particularly in some of our black communities. What I can say is that every day my officers and staff are working to strengthen those relationships. We do understand that only by working really closely with our communities can we build trust further. I know you'll want to discuss with us what we are specifically doing to build trust and confidence, but I end the year confident but not complacent. I'm proud of the work that my colleagues are doing with London's incredibly diverse communities to build positive relationships. I'm excited by the thought of the new workforce that we're going to bring in, and I am absolutely determined that we will stay committed to our relentless focus on what matters most to Londoners, keeping them safe. And finally, I will thank you for your support during the year, both locally and in fora like this. It means a lot. I know many of you work closely with the police, both centrally and locally, and that support is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your very comprehensive statement. We now move on to questions. Unfortunately, Assembly Member, is he here? Okay, right. Okay, we have a first question, which is in the name of Assembly Member Whittle. Mr. Assembly Member Whittle.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yeah. Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Good afternoon, Commissioner. My question really is that I asked you when we last met in one of these meetings, indeed, and since then have followed up with the Mayor, about the review you were carrying out with regard to the Cenotaph incident when there was a protest by Extinction Rebellion, and you said you were looking into it, you would be looking into it. Can you tell me what the results been?
Commissioner, question is to you, I believe.
My apologies. It'll be the last time I do that. Sorry, Chair. Yes, I think we met on the afternoon of the 11th of November, and this incident had happened that morning. And so I was still in the process of reviewing it. The first thing I would say is that the banner and the banner that was placed there and the incident itself, I, in common with many, many other people across the country, regard as not only inappropriate, as I said on the day, but a deeply offensive thing to do on that important day, 100 years on, such an important day. In terms of what happened, I can tell you that we had no intelligence whatsoever that this was going to happen. From the CCTV, which I've looked at myself, we can see that a very small number of people arrived at the base of the cenotaph and unfurled the banner and placed the wreath without causing any damage to anything else at just 1 minute past 8. At that point, they were not in the line of sight of any officers in the street. Officers who were policing the operation to support the ceremony at the cenotaph later that morning were not due to arrive until between 8:30 and 9. They were, in fact, out on horse guards at that point having a briefing. Officers were alerted and they made their way immediately. They arrived at 8 minutes past 8. I know that the media have said it took 30 minutes for the officers to arrive. It didn't. They were there by 8 minutes past 8, and they removed the articles at 12 minutes past 8. Of course, by the time they arrived, the people had left. On the day, the officers who responded formed the view that this did not amount to any crime, and that was a perfectly respectable view for them to take. We've looked at that again. It's clear there is no breach by these people of the COVID regulations, nor, as was suggested by some, would it meet public decency. I can tell you, sir, that we are still in seeking a further piece of advice from the Crown Prosecution Service about Section 5 of the Public Order Act. But I'd have to say the bar there is pretty high. So overall, in my view, no failure by any individual officer in that. What we're now doing, I imagine you'll be interested in, is we have increased patrols in the area. We are seeking to improve the camera coverage that there is around the cenotaph even further. Of course, we'll look at future important days in the calendar or similar operations with a careful eye to see what is an appropriate sort of set of time for the officers to be ground assigned, as we call it, deployed. And most crucially, given that, of course, this is an open monument, which is not a place I think people would expect to have boarded up, for example, or to have enormous numbers of officers around it. We are working with our partners who own the cenotaph, and of course those who make use of it, the British Legion and others, in order to see how we can reduce the risk further of inappropriate or offensive things happening in the future.
Thank you very much for that, Commissioner. When we spoke last, you said that they were there for about 20 minutes, so that's been revised. That wasn't the present.
The media said 30.
You said
I've
20.
looked at the CCTV myself. I can tell you they were there, the people were there for just a very short period of time.
20 minutes.
And my people arrived 7 minutes after they first got there.
So, but they were there for about 20 minutes.
No, I don't think they were. No, they weren't there for about 20 minutes.
Well, look, the fact is that, you know, as you say, it was extremely offensive to many people, but my main regard as well is that it was an extraordinary security risk. And when you say that there was sort of no way that there was no intelligence, how did they actually get, you know, I'm around that way a lot, how do they actually get so near to the cenotaph to be able to move their stuff out and then stay there unchallenged? The reason I want to ask you this again, Commissioner, because this is extremely important to, I think, millions of people actually. The cenotaph is not just a London monument, it's a British monument. Just a couple of weeks later, and indeed a couple of 100 yards away from the cenotaph, a peaceful protester, a 72-year-old woman, managed to be bundled into the back of a police van by 4 of your officers. There seemed to be no problem about dealing with her very quickly, to the point, such an outrageous act that an MP brought it up in the House that very day. Can you not see how people now are...
And I think here is required a lot of hard work, or put it down, manage it that way.
Make things easy on yourself, John.
Can you please stop? We've got some interference. Okay, carry on. It's gone. Please carry on.
Right, I'll just repeat that. A 72-year-old woman was bundled into the back of a police van. She was protesting outside Parliament, perfectly peacefully. 4 policemen got to her and put her in the back of a van. It caused outrage from a passing MP who then brought it up in the House of Commons quite rightly. This is extraordinary. This is in the same vicinity. You managed somehow to jump on those people very, very quickly. Indeed, in this case, a 72-year-old woman. And yet somehow or other, Extinction Rebellion somehow manages to be able to stay there for a matter of minutes up the road. Can you not see how people now think that you do preside over 2-tier policing?
Well, I don't preside over 2-tier policing. We are completely impartial. We deal with the circumstances that we have in front of us, and we deal with our understanding of what the intelligence is and what the likely risk of any type of occurrence might be. These events, of course, as you say, although in a geographically similar place, that you're talking about, we're on different days. Now, I need to be careful about the second one because, of course, people have been charged, and that was an unlawful protest in which we had gone to police that event in order to persuade people not to protest, which at the time was unlawful, and to disperse. They did not do so. I need to be careful how much further I go, but that is what we were doing our policing job. Now, in terms of the cenotaph, I think I've explained. There were no one of the suggestions at the time was that police officers were standing and watching. My point is there were no police officers in the area at the time, in the immediate area at the time. They were not in the line of sight of any officers. We police, I go there as much as you do, possibly more. We police that area with a lot of presence, but they are patrolling officers in the main who are moving around. There are a whole range of sites that are of interest to people, and also some places which contain, of course, people who are absolutely, like Parliament, need a huge amount of personal protection. But we police primarily on the streets with patrols. And I can't say anything other than, at that point, there was not a patrol looking at it. What I can say is, as soon as we were alerted, we were there very quickly. By that time, the people had gone. You asked me how they got there. I think they came out of the tube station. I haven't followed that bit of CCTV. That's what I'm told. They came out of the tube station. They came down a tiny bit of Whitehall. They stood there looking completely like any other citizen, and then walked across the cenotaph. Many people were walking up to the cenotaph at the time, lots of visitors to the cenotaph, and when they got there, they unfurled their banner. That's how it happened.
I know, Commissioner, and you've been through that before. You say you can't talk because people are being charged or whatever on this second incident I'm talking about, but maybe let me give you a bit of context. Extinction Rebellion early this year, even during this COVID period, we're allowed to bring London pretty much to a halt, central London. This happened again, and yet, as I said, a 72-year-old woman just protesting on her own is manhandled and basically spread-eagled and put into a police van like that. So frankly, this does not look like partial policing. It seems that there are certain protests and certain causes which somehow you put a favourable eye on, whether it is Extinction Rebellion or Black Lives Matter, and yet when it comes to other forms of protest, you are extremely, shall we say, keen to keep the peace.
Very briefly,
I think I've said to you before, my officers, I believe, are as experienced as anyone in the world, as professional as anyone in the world, probably more so. And they are, one thing they absolutely definitely are, is completely impartial. They deal with the circumstances in front of them. We have arrested hundreds of Extinction Rebellion protesters over the last 18 months, hundreds and hundreds, and they've been charged and they've gone to court. We have to deal with what is in front of us and what is possible, what is appropriate in all the circumstances.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
We take people's, under normal circumstances, we take people's rights to assemble and to express themselves, to process, all those things extremely seriously. We also have to balance those rights with other people's rights to go about their lawful business.
Thank you,
That's
Commissioner.
the balancing act that officers are always doing. During these regulations, which, by the way, as you know, have changed countless times in the last 6 months, the officers have had to be policing not just the normal kind of way in which you would think about a protest, but also the health regulations.
Sorry, Commissioner, we are out of time with this question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to question from Assembly Member Desai, which is about keeping Londoners safe during pandemic. Assembly Member Desai, do you want to also indicate who the question is addressed to, please?
Will do, Chair. My first, it's for the Mayor, but if the Commissioner wishes to make a comment, I would invite her to do so.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Senator Desai. The COVID-19 pandemic has created unprecedented challenges for all of us. For the Met Police Service, this has meant new regulations and powers to reduce the spread of the virus and keep Londoners safe, alongside increases in public order events and a return to pre-lockdown demand levels. At City Hall, we've been working hard to support the Met Police Service throughout this time. My Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Sophie Linden, is working with our partners, including service providers, local councils, community groups and charities, to ensure key services MOPAC funds continue to be provided. MOPAC's also been instrumental in getting finance out to key frontline community and voluntary organisations via the London Community Response Fund. We've invested an additional £1.5 million to provide safe accommodation and support to victims of domestic abuse, and an additional £750,000 to build on the success of the £3 million Rescue and Response Programme, which supports young Londoners exploited through county lines. Ensuring young people receive the support needed as we move into the next year is going to be critical, and London's Violence Reduction Unit is funding mentoring support for disadvantaged young people who attend London's pupil referral units. Unfortunately, Chair, COVID-19 has brought our court system to the point of crisis, with almost a quarter of total outstanding cases across England and Wales being in Crown Courts. Another Commissioner is as concerned about this as I am, and I've written to the Lord Chancellor to urge him to act now to prevent our already creaking justice system from collapsing, putting the safety of Londoners at risk.
Commissioner?
Thank you.
On the operational side, would you like to say something?
Thank you. Well, just to say, as well as the changed legislation, the changed demand profile, having to change the ways in which we engage with people, including, of course, yes, young people, and working in very close partnerships with the strategic coordinating group across London for COVID, but also locally working against COVID, and in very challenging circumstances for the criminal justice system. I think it's worth noting that we've had to provide, like everybody, but a COVID secure service as much as we can. So that has meant adapting hugely the way our custody suites have worked, but we haven't reduced the number of the people we've arrested over this time period. In fact, overall, we've probably increased them slightly. My officers have faced, obviously, not knowing as they go into a house whether someone has COVID. They've been dealing with the deceased, people, including, sadly, to support families where somebody has died of COVID. And they have also, like everybody, had to work remotely often where they can. And I'm very pleased to say that we've had considerable focus in the last 18 months on our digital working. And so even though we work at what we call official sensitive and indeed sometimes at secret, we are able to work remotely. So it's been a very different year for us in terms of the way we work.
Thank you, Commissioner. If I can stick with you, Commissioner, just looking at the big, broad picture, going to 2021, policing in London has certainly, from the outside at least, noticeably changed over the years, reflecting changes in society, types of crime, advances in technology. You are now over halfway into your term as Commissioner. What impact and changes do you hope to have affected on the way the Met operates by the end of your tenure? And can you give a broader sense of where you feel policing in London and the UK will be going in the longer term? What are some of the key opportunities and challenges we are likely to see further down the road that we should perhaps begin to think about now?
Thank you. I mean, as I look at next year, if I could say, first of all, obviously we're thinking about the pandemic will be going on. It will be affecting some communities already often very disadvantaged, much more than others, and that will undoubtedly affect policing and safety. I'm convinced that violent crime through next year and beyond will remain the #1 priority for this service, and alongside that, the importance of maintaining and improving public confidence and trust in all our communities. In the short to medium term, you know that we have some uncertainties about our funding, and that will be challenging for the next 2 years at least. The Mayor has already mentioned, and I have too, the challenges for the criminal justice system, and I think that will continue certainly next year and probably the year beyond. We have some major projects and programs that I want to land, and of course we are looking to recruit a much more diverse workforce. So that's my sort of thought about next year, if I may. In terms of my commissionership, I hope that people would say, I don't really think like this, look, think about legacy, but since you've asked, I hope people would think that I've made some real reductions in violence and left a Met that has real momentum across London, not just within the Met, but across the partnerships, to continue to reduce violence and the effect it has particularly on our young people. I hope that I think the Met will be healthier, happier, stronger, and it will have lots more diverse talent for the future. I think it will have been transformed. It's an overused word, but transformed in terms of its use of data, digital and technology. And obviously the most important thing is that whatever day I walk out the door, it has the appetite to keep on changing. Not that I'm thinking of that, Caroline, don't look worried. I'm not thinking of it at all. But the point is, it needs to we need to have a real appetite for change and improvement for the future. And I think we do, but I'd be appalled if that wasn't the case when I left, whenever that is. I'd like to think that we have improved and improving relationships, particularly with London's black communities, with our young people, and that overall the Met is seen as a genuinely trustworthy and ethical organisation.
Thank you, Commissioner. I've got two more supplementary questions, and I'm conscious of the time that I have. So to both of you, Commissioner and then the Mayor. Commissioner, at the end of your opening statement, you rightly talked about the most important thing is keeping Londoners safe. And I'm sure all the members will agree with me that keeping young Londoners safe must remain one of our utmost priorities. Evidence has suggested that the threats for young people, and particularly disadvantaged young people, have intensified during the pandemic and lockdown. County lines, for example. I think, Commissioner, in your statement, you referred to county lines at least 4 times. What measures have you taken, Commissioner, and then Mr. Mayor, if you could come in, to address this issue and keep young Londoners safe throughout the pandemic?
Okay. Well, in a whole range of ways, as we've both said, we've had to work slightly differently. Our Safer Schools partnerships have been busier than ever. Our volunteer police cadets have been really busy. We've implemented this year, as you know, the Schools Watch work to make sure that people are safe when they are on the way in and out of schools. We've continued our work in the pupil referral units. All our schools and youth officers have had bespoke trauma-informed police training so that they will be better at understanding those children who have suffered trauma and might be at risk of victimization or criminality in later life. We've enhanced the way we work with young people through our various diversion schemes. We've invested in some new problem-solving posts, so individuals whose job it is to look very specifically at young people. And we will continue to work with the Mayor and the VRU and others in a whole variety of early intervention and sort of diversion schemes, some of which we're best placed to deliver, many of which others are best placed to deliver. And you've mentioned county lines, and I think we've made a real impact there. I talked about the 230 lines that we've closed just since November. This week alone, I think we've locked up 19 gang members who are involved in serious gang violence and/or county lines. All of this works to keep young people safe. The amount of seizures that we've been making of drugs, weapons, and cash, record levels, higher than any year I've ever known. So trying to really get to not just county lines, but other gangs as well. And to ensure that when we do that, when we come across the young people who've got tangled up with the gang or the county line, that we do effectively safeguard them. I'll let the Mayor carry on.
No, sorry. Thank you, Commissioner. That's the sort of news Londoners want to hear. Mr. Mayor, you already talked about the Young Londoners Fund and other preventative measures, so I won't invite you to come in on that question. But my final supplementary question, very briefly. Into your 5th year now, can you outline for us what you consider to be your main achievements in improving policing and the safety of Londoners over the last 4 years, particularly around the question of police numbers and other frontline policing initiatives? The big picture of the last 4 years.
Sure. Well, the good news is, Umesh, we have 1,000 more police officers now than when I first became there. The reality is I inherited a mayoralty that was managed in decline. Numbers were going down. We've managed to increase the numbers, but also the Commissioner's talked about the fantastic teamwork that now takes place in relation to not just the police and various stakeholders across London, but the police service and police forces around the country as well. The good news on Mesh is a number of areas of crime are going down, and that's really important.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right. I have a number of questions following that as supplementary. May I start with Assemblymember Pigeon, please?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of keeping Londoners safe and challenges into the next year, I'd like to ask about police station closures and community policing. So, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the Met's estate strategy was paused at the beginning of the year due to the uncertainty over police officer numbers and additional officers, but also clearly the pressures of COVID-19 have led to further delays. But can you now provide an update on when you expect to complete and publish that revised estate strategy?
Yeah, no, thanks, Carol. That's a really important question. So I'm afraid the bad news is we can't, for the simple reason we're hoping to have the numbers of police officers we've received in all 3 years. If you remember, the government announced 20,000 additional police officers across England and Wales. The Commissioner and I think 6,000 is about the number we should receive over 3 years. We got the number for year 1, 1,300. The delay, Caroline, was knowing the numbers for years 2 and years 3, because we'd kick ourselves if we sold off this estate, which we may need. That being said, the Commissioner has advised me that there are some police estates she can definitely say with certainty the police won't need, irrespective of numbers. Paddington and Hendon are 2 good examples, and the Commissioner can talk more about that. But there is a slight hesitancy from the Commissioner's team to say set off A, B and C in case we need them, not just for police officers, but for the other staff that the Commissioner employs as well.
Thank you. And the need to have accessible police stations, I think, is really necessary for communities in London. They play, I think, a key role in ensuring people can easily contact the police and that community policing is real. There have been really strong and well-supported local campaigns to safeguard the future of several police stations across the capital under the threat of closure. Particularly, I want to highlight Wimbledon and Chiswick stations. So, Mr. Mayor, do you recognise the importance of these stations to the local communities? And are you in a position today to confirm if these stations will remain open in the longer term?
Yeah, in relation to Wimbledon, I can see that we paused the plans for Wimbledon because the local council and the community had a very good campaign, and there was a court case you're well aware of. I've not got the Chiswick deal, so maybe the Commissioner does. But aside from the 2 examples I've given, and there are a couple of other examples where we definitely can say they're surplus to the Met's requirement. Some of them, by the way, are dilapidated and they're not fit for a modern police service. The rest are on pause because the Commissioner is quite keen with us to do a proper review of our estate. I'm not sure, Commissioner, if you're able to answer specifically on those 2, or Sophie's on the line as well about Chiswick and Wimbledon.
Can I suggest Sophie in the first instance, then I'll do 1 sentence after?
Caroline, we've discussed this yesterday at the Budget and Performance Committee a number of times. As you know, just as the Mayor's been saying, with the Met are reviewing their estate strategy. They've brought forward proposals for disposal of some buildings that they absolutely know are surplus to requirements. I'm afraid I haven't got the Chiswick police station details in front of me, both of which, in terms of other disposals, they're reviewing them, and disposals that will be needed for next financial year. I should have firm proposals by February on that.
Okay. The Commissioner, you had a sentence to add?
I think she said it. Actually. We have reduced from nearly 600 buildings. We've hurtled down to a much lower number. We need to be, and that is partly about having this much more mobile workforce. It's also, as you know, about having buildings that are actually fit for purpose, not completely dilapidated and falling down. So the buildings that we are retaining are ones that actually work for our people and for our public. But we do need to just, there are some that are absolutely still being sold almost as we speak. There are some on the market, including some large buildings, but we need to just reset a little bit once we understand better what the growth is in the next couple of years.
Well, I hope that somebody could come back to me maybe after the meeting if you have more details on Wimbledon and Chiswick particularly. But finally, to the Commissioner, I've been concerned about confidence in the police in London. It's at 58%. It's one of the lowest recorded, though I know you have said that there's a change in how they're reporting. But there's also the number of people who know how to contact their local ward officer has fallen from 41% at the end of 2014 to just 16% this year. Do you understand that maintaining some local police stations across the capital is important for people to have that confidence of the police, know where the police are, and also to house, hopefully, these additional officers that you're seeking to recruit?
We're absolutely committed to a locally based police service, absolutely recognise that people want to be able to identify local officers, and we've maintained and I hope in future years we'll increase the investment in very local officers. When we get this growth, whatever it is, they'll be out there dealing with violence, but working very locally. That's absolutely what we want to do in neighbourhoods, in town centres, and that sort of thing. But the buildings are a slightly separate issue. I understand that people are in certain places very attached to a building.
I've got to conclude this question now, please.
Visit, or hardly anyone ever visits, and they weren't practical for us to work from. So I know this is a very emotive issue, and I do understand that for some local communities, the loss of the building has been a significant thing. In terms of the surveys, again, there's a massive change in the way the survey.
Commissioner, thank you very much. We have exceeded the time now.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you. Next one is Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are also about confidence and the positive view of the Metropolitan Police, and I'm sure you're very well aware, because the Mayor's action plan has just been developed, that confidence has been falling, particularly decreasing over the last quarter amongst black Londoners. And at the same time, I look at figures and I can see that stop and search is going up. In your opinion, what is the main aspect of the new action plan which is going to help to reverse this trend of confidence going down? This is for Cressida Dick.
Thank you. Well, firstly, just to say that I have set out, when I became Commissioner, to try to reduce the gap in confidence between black Londoners and other Londoners, and indeed there were some very, very encouraging signs that the gap was reducing until latterly. You've mentioned this last quarter, which of course was very challenging. This is not a defensive point, but I think if you were to speak to any colleague in any police service anywhere across the world, you would find that a similar kind of drop in the last few months. In many places, much, much bigger drop than we have had. And still within those survey figures, there are some encouraging things, like 81% of Londoners trust us as an organisation. But I'm not defensive and I'm not complacent about this, and indeed I'm excited about the work that we are doing as a result of the impetus, if you like, that's been given to us and all organisations across London, frankly, and beyond, by the events of this summer. I believe that the work that we will do to continue to, but much sort of faster focus on representation and having even higher numbers of Black Londoners joining us. We've got the opportunity with the growth. I think that is really exciting, and I'm you know, it was me that set the aspiration that we would head for 40% of our intake being Black, Asian, and minority ethnic. That was me and my board. Secondly, I think the work that we're going to do to totally sort of not change, but improve, and hopefully you've seen some of this already, the way in which we're engaging with Londoners, Black Londoners and young Londoners in all kinds of manifest different ways, I think will be brilliant to see the sort of results of. We're already doing lots of it. I myself, just last night, doing some engagement with young Black Londoners, and all my team are highly involved with this. And then thirdly, I think some of the work that we'll be doing to help our officers understand better the perspectives of the people that they provide the service to and for. So the way in which we train people, involving the communities more in the training, the way in which we can involve communities more in being alongside us as we do our work, I think will have massive benefits, two-way benefits for us and the people we serve.
Thanks very much. I'd just like to come back on that sort of final point about the training and the involvement with communities, and perhaps I could come to you now, Mr. Mayor. Thanks very much, Cressida. That was really helpful. And how are the community groups that were involved in producing the action plan? And obviously, it was called an action plan because I think some people were a bit cynical. How are they going to be involved in taking these things forward? How are we going to be able to measure and know as Assembly members, you as the Mayor, Sophie Linden as the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime, that the changes that Cressida has just been pointing out are definitely taking place? How are we going to monitor this? How is the community going to be monitoring it?
One of the reasons I share the Commissioner's optimism about this action plan not being like others that we've not commissioned, or the Commissioner, is because this was a plan where the police, Sophie, Debbie, myself, and London communities met regularly over the course of the summer to discuss some of the issues they were raising with us. There are 40 plus actions, and the key thing, as the Commissioner said, is to involve the community in recruitment, really important, to involve the community in relation to training, really important, and then to involve the communities in oversight, really important. And the important thing, Leonie, is I don't want the police to feel as if this has been imposed upon them. This is a partnership between the police, the communities and City Hall working together. And I think if we can resolve the issue of the lack of trust and confidence, that will lead to more effective policing for everyone.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and pass over to my colleague, Jeanette Arnold, I think wants to come in.
Assembly Member Arnold, you're on the list. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I just start with saying to the Commissioner, I would like to offer my best wishes to her and all in the Met Police, and add thanks for all of the good work that they have achieved in this extraordinary year. And I just think that it's regrettable that there are still some areas that we still have to scrutinise, that we have to get right. I do take your point that you said when you started your term of office that there seemed to be a shift, and the gap in terms of the level of trust and confidence within Black Londoners and the police service was narrowing, and that has widened. And that can't be allowed to go on. And so I know of your commitment in this area of work. And we've heard much in terms of the action plan and what that's going to achieve. But around the area of oversight, I wonder what your thoughts were in terms of statements that Assistant Commissioner Robert Beckley, who I understand is currently at the Home Office, had to say recently when he advocated the use of independent reviewers of body-worn footage. And he said that they should be allowed deeper scrutiny than is currently afforded to stop and search monitoring groups, as this would mean allowing reviews of videos of all types of police actions, such as handcuffing and the use of taser, really making, if you like, that scrutiny of the actions of police officers by community independent people, if you like, as tight as possible. Are you willing to go as far as Assistant Commissioner Robert Beckley would like forces to go? Or do you think it has to be a measured approach or a staged approach?
So firstly, unfortunately, Jeanette, I didn't see what Mr. Beckley wrote. He's an old colleague and an old friend, sometime retired actually from active policing, but absolutely and currently seconded to the Home Office for a particular and very important piece of work. But the general point that people should have the ability to to see what we're doing, and that we should be, as transparent as can be, I completely accept. I think we already have a lot of mechanisms, and you can see that the Mayor in his plan is having some extra scrutiny roles sort of built in. I also think there's very strong governance internally as it happens. So, every time a taser is discharged, we have a really good look at it. Every time, and that includes independent people very often, every time we have one of those viral videos that you and I have discussed before, we have a group that includes a load of independent people looking at what's gone on there. What do we make of that? Was there any learning? We have the public are, out and about on ride-alongs, on our stop searches. We want to do more and more of that. So whether this particular proposal, which I'm afraid I haven't grasped all the detail of, is precisely the right thing to do or not, I can't say, because I haven't seen the detail of it. What I would say is I think we're very highly scrutinised. I think we are highly regulated. I think we're highly held to account. And I also think that we are very, very transparent. I was disappointed to see as you know, the fact that because of a legal sort of issue with the way in which the information law was being interpreted, we had to have a pause in our stop and search monitoring groups looking at body-worn video. But we've managed now to get through that, and I think that's a good thing. So I'm open to new ideas, but frankly, I do believe we've got a lot at the moment, and the Mayor's plan gives us quite a bit more as well.
Okay, thank you for that. A quick question for Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, Cressida spoke about her goal about getting 40% of Black Londoners to join the force. What particular action are you taking? I'm saying this as a mother of a black man and the granddaughter of a young lady thinking about a career. And I find myself not able to put my hand on my heart and say, I would feel comfortable with them joining the force. It's sad, but it's the truth. So what are you going to be doing to actually change the perception of members of the black community, particularly mothers, who sometimes can't go to bed at night if their black sons are still out because they're fearful either for general violence or that they'll be arrested by the police, and that it turns out it was a disproportionate action by the police?
Well, Jeanette, you know this as well as I do, but black Londoners, innocent black Londoners, are more likely to be the victim of crime than anyone else. And so it's really important that we understand that actually we police by consent, and the most effective way to police is for our police service to look like our city. And I want the Met Police Service to be the employer of choice Londoners go to. And I'm hoping that Londoners will have seen the response of this Commissioner over the last few weeks and months, the response of this Mayor in relation to issues that are global. George Floyd wasn't brutally killed in London, thankfully. Minnesota, Minneapolis is thousands of miles away, but we feel the ripples of trauma felt by black Londoners. So the Commissioner and I, together, have got some really, really ambitious targets. The Commissioner wants to double the amount of sergeants and inspectors over the next few years. She wants to almost double the amount of new black recruits and black Asian minority ethnic recruits in London. And we're going to lead by example, Jeanette. The fact that the Commissioner is saying, you know what, please come and join us in relation to helping us recruit. We'll be targeting communities where there's a high number of black Asian minority ethnic communities to recruit from. And by the way, Jeanette, we're also going to focus on black Londoners as well as the other parts of the BAME family. We're going to involve the black community when it comes to helping us train future police officers really important to give them confidence. We're also going to involve Black Londoners in how you hold the police to account, who polices the police. And I've put this question back to you, Jeanette. You tell me any other time in history where the Met Police Service has worked so closely with black communities. You tell me any other global police force that works the way this one's done, and I'd be happy for the Commissioner and I to see if we can replicate that. And the answer is there isn't one. We are leading the way, and I want the Met Police Service to be a beacon when it comes to global policing.
Well, thank you for asking me the question and answering it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Right. Next indication is from Dr. Assembly Member Dr. Onkar Sahota. Please do ask who you're raising the question with, please.
Commissioner, this is a question for you. Can you hear me, Commissioner? Great.
If I can.
Okay. First of all, Commissioner, I want to echo all the gratitude and the thanks expressed by Assembly members for the magnificent work which the Metropolitan Police has done, particularly over the last few months, keeping us safe in the face of all the pandemic we had. But that also puts a duty upon us to make sure that we do everything we can to keep our police officers safe. And I know that there's been an increase of 40% of attacks on the officers. On a recent report, the NPCC made 28 recommendations to ensure that we have safety of our officers improves. How many of these recommendations have you implemented, and what progress are we making in implementing them, please?
Thank you. Well, thank you for acknowledging the risks that officers take on a daily basis. And sadly, yes, this year we have seen an increase in officers assaulted. And with the Police and Crime Committee, on many occasions, we've discussed that, and we've discussed the coughing and spitting incidents during COVID in particular. We've also discussed the way in which, in the Met since 2019, we've really stepped up our response to any incident when an officer has been assaulted. So our welfare, our occupational health, our determination to bring people to justice. We now have 82% of our people who go to court are found guilty of assault on an emergency worker or similar offence, and we have a very high rate of finding the culprit and bringing them to justice, which I think is, close working with the CPS and the courts has led to a real improvement there. So we take it very seriously when it happens, but we want to stop it from happening. I'm sorry to say there's an example from just last night when a lone motorcyclist from the Road Traffic Policing Command got behind a car which seemed to have crashed into a series of vehicles, injured some people, went up to the vehicle, 2 people inside, and my officer was subject to a really nasty a set of assaults, including damage to his eye socket, doing exactly what we asked them to do: stop people who want to or have already harmed other people, do an intervention, either an arrest or a stop and search, and his life may be changed by that. And it's all too common, and it is completely unacceptable. Clearly, some of the people that we deal with have significant mental health issues. Many of them will be out of their heads on some drug or occasionally on alcohol, but every assault is unpleasant, and some of them are really, really nasty. We've done a lot over the last few years also to improve the sort of safety of our officers. You'll be aware that we've rolled out the new positive lock baton. We've not got the new Parva spray. We've in the last year nearly 1,000 extra officers equipped with taser. And we've increased the training time for our officers from 5 to 8 days on officer safety. And indeed, as we go forward, we'll be reviewing the officer safety training again, in line with the National Police Chiefs Council Officer Safety Review. I don't know if you've read the review, but unfortunately, it is not one which lends itself to saying very clearly, this is done here now. Several of the things that they propose Chief Constables should do, we have already done. Most of their recommendations, and there are 28 of them, relate to national work, where national curricula needs to be changed, where, for example, on conflict management or indeed on officer safety, we are an integral part of that. Okay. We are absolutely up to speed with split and bite guards. every single recommendation that we could have implemented, we already have, and I'm happy to write to you afterwards about those if you would like.
Yeah, I'll be very happy, Commissioner, if you write to me and to the and to the chair of the Assembly. But there's one more thing. We've always talked about the physical health of the police officers, but you quite raised the question of the mental health. It's an astonishing fact that between 2011 and 2019, there were 169 officers who committed suicide. That's an average of 21 suicides per year, compared to the number of people who died while they were still serving. There's 92 police officers who died while still in the Metropolitan Police. That's an average of 6. So how are we supporting the mental health of our police officers?
Thank you for the question. I don't want to get into a numbers debate, but I don't think it's right to say we've had 20 a year in London committing suicide. Far from it. But I will write back to you on the actual numbers. Clearly, the issue is very, very, very important. We have, in the last 2 years, increased hugely our investment in the well-being of our staff. So improved in all kinds of ways, speed and sort of level of access to appropriate support after an incident, or if they are suffering from repeat trauma, or if they have a mental health issue. And so there's more money has gone into that, and a better standard has been achieved. We've also encouraged, so we have a 24/7 helpline, for example, under our employee assistance program, so somebody can just ring up and get help straight away. In the workplace, we have mental health networks, so every unit will have a mental health sort of a person who's trained in mental health issues that they can reach out to, make themselves known in a building or on a team. And we have a sort of voluntary network of blue light champions. So these are people who, some of whom have been through issues themselves or seen their family affected or friends. They have a huge coordinated peer support network. It is not the case, actually, that psychological disorders has increased as a percentage of our absence. It hasn't. It's stayed pretty static. And indeed, actually, the volumes of people being away from work because of psychological disorder has not increased in the last couple of years.
Okay.
And I think that is despite the fact that everybody knows that mental health in general is a sort of growing issue in the population at large. Our officers are vulnerable. They've been through some major incidents. Some, remember in 2017, some people turned up at 5 hugely traumatic incidents with the terrorist attacks in Brentford. So we're very alert to the idea of a preventative approach and then a reactive approach. I'm not complacent, but I think we're doing a lot and we're doing well.
Commissioner, I'm out of time, but you're absolutely right. Those figures I quoted were national figures, not London figures. So please write to me about London figures, and also what help is available to people who've already retired, who've left the police force, what help is available to them. So I'm happy if you give me answer in writing to mental health support for people, officers serving, and also what's available to them after they've retired. So if you write to me, that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Desai has indicated.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for the Commissioner, and then another supplementary for the Deputy Mayor. Commissioner, it was recently reported that there have, since the beginning of the pandemic, there have been 14 domestic homicides, and we also got to bear in mind that domestic abuse also takes place within same-sex relationships. So incidents have gone up 8%. In what way has the Met adopted its approach to dealing with domestic abuse, given this rise over the 8 months? What lessons have been learned from the lockdowns and the various restrictions? And also, I think it's important that the public do know that the Met has got initiatives like Operation Dauntless Plus and the predatory offender units. Could you tell us a bit more about their work? So lessons from lockdown. How have you changed your approach over the last 8 months, and specific initiatives that the Met is implementing to counter the unacceptable crime of domestic abuse?
Thank you. Firstly, to say in relation to homicide, sadly we have had a number that appear to be domestic related, if you like, albeit our definition is quite broad, so it will include tragic case where mother kills children or son kills mother. As well as the classic partner, ex-partner type relationships. But this is not an outlier year. This is not a high year so far. They're such small numbers, I hesitate to say that, but thankfully. But this is not a year of exceptionally high domestic homicide. You talked about the increase. We've had about an 11% increase if you compare April to November in incidents, and rather less than that in crimes, about 8%. And actually, for us, that is not so different from the rises that sadly we've been seeing in previous years. I say sadly, as you know, we never quite know whether it is better reporting to us or whether there is greater prevalence of the crime. But what we are aware of, obviously, is that this year, for reasons that we've rehearsed before, it will have been difficult for people to contact us or other services on occasion, certainly in the earliest few weeks of national restrictions, that people may have had tensions build up because of financial insecurities or because of being in a small space confined. And we were fully alert, as were all our partners, and Sophie or the Mayor will talk about that, to the possibility that there would be increases in abuse and a variety of different violent and controlling behaviours. We've had to try to find new ways to reach out to victims, new ways to support them once we know about them. We've worked very closely with other teams in London to do this. We also now have the challenge that many domestic violence cases will be taking a very long time to go to court, so we're having to support victims over a more protracted period. And as you say, we have recently launched our predatory offender units, which I think are very exciting, quite small units, but in each of the local BCUs, as we call them, there is one, and they can take on and do take on a daily basis people who pose the highest risk, the highest harm, people who are wanted and have sort of evaded justice, or we just need to get hold of straight away. They can use slightly more sophisticated proactive and intelligence techniques. And I've been out with ours a couple of times already. They were only launched in early November. They have already arrested, I think, over 200 people. And some of them are really, really nasty characters, you know, people who just abuse one partner after another after another. They don't just deal with domestic abuse, they will deal with harmful practices and certain categories of rape and serious sexual assault. But this is a new unit with new money, new extra capability to support the teams that were working against domestic abuse in the first place.
Thank you, Commissioner. Excellent stuff. Deputy Mayor, if I could just ask you, in late November, the Mayor announced additional funding towards tackling domestic abuse. Part of this was to be spent on tackling the behavior of perpetrators of domestic abuse. This vital work can complement the policing tactics the Commissioner has outlined in an answer to my last question. What types of intervention will this funding from the Mayor, and what difference will it make to the safety of domestic abuse victims?
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Amos. Yes, I mean, Sadiq, the Mayor, has invested more in not just services for victims of domestic violence, because during COVID, he invested 1.5 million to set up accommodation so that women and men fleeing violence had somewhere safe to go. What we have been successful in doing is putting aside money to tackle perpetrators and those that are inflicting the violence. What that means is that we're investing in more of the DRIVE programme and rolling that out not just to Croydon but to a couple of other boroughs, and we are also working with other boroughs on other types of programmes to tackle perpetrators. For example, in Barking and Dagenham, only last week I had a fantastic meeting with those that are putting together their programme in behaviour change and tackling the perpetrators. We've also, as part of a response to the emergency COVID response around accommodation, put together I think, a really innovative piece of work around what we call early intervention, which is intervening before the abuse takes place, or intervening before the abuse gets really to such a significant level that the woman has to flee, in order to get the perpetrator out of that accommodation. Trying to look at what a lot of people say is why should the woman have to leave? Why doesn't the perpetrator leave? Very, very small scale. We're going to take learnings from that, but quite an exciting, innovative piece of work.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Commissioner.
Just one request, please. Just a reminder that our members' questions are timed on a very strict time allocation. So may I please ask our guests to be very succinct when answering the questions so that they don't overreach their time limits. Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Dismore. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's to the Commissioner. Cressida, you said in the Police and Crime Committee on the 11th of November that you've not been privy to the negotiations with the EU around policing and security, and you didn't know what the arrangements were going to be in place after December 31st, and which I think I indicated found extraordinary. I think most people would as well. You said, and I'll quote, "I don't know what we're going to retain. For us, we make very good use of our access to Europol, which is most concerning from an organised crime perspective, and Eurojust. You said, clearly we'll be out of those. Use European arrest warrant repeatedly in high volumes and for serious crime. There were 16,000 arrests since 2009. You said it seems slightly less likely that we'll be able to do that in future, and so there'll be other arrangements put in place to parallel those, but you didn't know what they were going to be. You said the issue of passenger name records is extremely important, not least to counter-terrorism policing, and it is unresolved at the moment. That's the Schengen system, which is widely used for information sharing and security and border management. And you said we're members of the Prüm Convention, and all countries benefit from the UK's membership of Prüm, not least us, and the NPS is in the forefront of that, and that's the fingerprint sharing database, which has been used 89,000 times since July 2019. That's what you said last month. Are you any of the wiser now than you were a month ago at PCC?
I think all my comments about the tools and our access to them, you've repeated some there. I've made others public over the month. In addition, Martin Hewitt and Lynn Owens have recently written to the Home Affairs Select Committee publicly with a full explanation of the tools that we use and how we use them and what might happen if we don't have them. I think now of all times, it would be inappropriate for me to comment whatsoever on what I think may or may not happen, what tools we may have or won't have. We'll all know, I assume, in a matter of days, and you will get the comment from me then about the impact.
Okay, well, perhaps we could go to the Mayor. Sadiq, a week after the Commissioner's comments on the 19th of November, Assistant Commissioner Basu, head of counter-terrorism, told the BBC, quote, "We need to negotiate a security treaty that either retains or improves on the current position we've got today. It's incredibly important for the safety and security of our country. A no-deal Brexit," he said, "means that the country will be left safe in a non-negotiated outcome where a security treaty wasn't forthcoming. That's the bottom line. We've made it very clear that we need as much time to negotiate those agreements with our European counterparts as possible, and we can't do that until the negotiations are finished." And I assume you would agree with that, and also agree that the safety and security of Londoners is paramount. The NPS needs access to these vital policing tools across Europe, but in light of there only being less than 3 weeks to go and no deal in sight, where are we in getting the security arrangements sorted out, and what impact is a no-deal Brexit going to have on policing and security?
Well, in answer to the opening statement from the Commissioner, she talked about the amazing work being done in relation to counter-terrorism and the work we're doing against those people who target London. Speaking as somebody who has seen the cooperation taking place, both you and I were parliamentarians, when the Met Police Service used the European arrest warrant, the extradition, to get fast extradition of somebody who tried to commit an act of terrorism in July 2005. So we know the benefits of the close cooperation we have with our partners in the European Union. The phrase I think Neil Basu would use, and I'm sure others would use, is a potential intelligence blind spot. What I do know is that our police service are working incredibly hard in London with bilateral contacts they've got with the various partners around Europe. What we can't run away from is any system after the 1st of Jan will be more clunky, more expensive and more time-consuming than what we currently have now.
And I assume you've not been involved in any discussions with Europe over what we're going to have in place of the existing arrangements, which work pretty well.
No, as the Commissioner said, both Martin Hewitt and the NCA have been in touch with the government. Home Affairs Select Committee, you'll be aware, Andrew, have talked about some of their concerns. And the worry is, Andrew, we're now in the space, we're talking about no deal or already flimsy thin deal, both of which are clearly less good than what we have now.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Assembly Member Qureshi, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I address my question on counter-terrorism to the Commissioner? Commissioner, Your Assistant Commissioner, Basu, has said that there has been an increase in extremist material being put online, whilst vulnerable people have been at home more during the pandemic, more isolated and online with less access to their usual support networks. What change, if any, has there been in the number of counter-terror referrals since the first lockdown began in March?
Thank you very much. We saw initially during the first lockdown quite a considerable reduction in the referrals to us in terms of, for example, prevent. Of course, as life has begun to return to normal and through various campaigns that we've been running, we have been able to increase the referrals. And you'll have seen, for example, the Act Now campaign, which has launched fairly recently, which again has resulted in more people contacting us. We will, the Mayor has already talked about the extraordinary work that goes on, not just in the Met, but with our partners and intelligence agencies and locally as well. We do have very strong capabilities. We're now, as you may have noticed, investing in a really world-leading facility that will bring together partners and the Met in a way that I think is going to make the public in London much, much safer for the longer term future. And I'm excited about that. But we've absolutely recognised, and you'll have seen that the threat level went up to severe not long ago, that the threat from terrorism is still real. You've seen what's happened in Europe recently in a number of different countries. And our investigative demand is still high. We're dealing with a caseload of more than 850 live investigations. And we're still getting now, again, a healthy number of referrals, is the way we would describe it, in relation to prevent. There was clearly a reduction initially because we used to get a lot of referrals from schools and from children's services, people who weren't any longer in contact with individuals.
Assemblymember Qureshi, you are on mute. Function. Now we can hear you.
Thank you. I hear what you're saying, Commissioner. It's just that the proportion of right-wing related referrals into Prevent was 18% in 2017 and 18, then 24% in 2018-19, which is the highest ever level according to the Home Office. Do you know what the proportions are in 2019-20 and the current year to date at all?
I can find it very quickly, but I don't want to guess. I know it's been going up slightly latterly, and when I last looked, it was over 20%. But I need to double check and give you an accurate figure. But clearly, we are seeing more referrals as a proportion of the whole that are in relation to right-wing extremism, violent extremism, and of course you'll be aware that the intelligence service MI5 have taken over the lead for dealing with right-wing terrorism, and that of itself leads to greater what we call discovery of individuals because they're able to use different and in some respects greater capabilities, but the joint focus from them and us is leading to us understanding more and more and more about right-wing extremism.
Well, thank you very much, and if you could write to me with those figures, that would be useful. I was just interested in your response to some of what we heard in the inquiry in New Zealand into the Christchurch massacre and some of the suggestions there. I mean, for example, they identified some of the same traits that Commissioner Basu mentioned that we need to be mindful of, and also they suggested that there has to be there was too much focus possibly on Islamist terrorism and not this. We've got to get the balance right, I think was the suggestion in their report. And I wondered whether there are lessons for us to learn from what happened in New Zealand a few years ago.
So I think there's always lessons to learn. We have had very close relationships with New Zealand police, and we've personally I've had at least 2 presentations from them in the last couple of years on what they learned, both about prevention and indeed response. Their context is slightly different from ours, but not so very different. We're also, of course, keeping, I won't make any comment on this, but we're keeping a very close eye on the Manchester inquiry to see what is coming from that. And we have been implementing the recommendations from the 2017 reviews that the Director General of the Security Service and I instigated. All of them say that perhaps historically there's not been enough focus on broader forms of terrorism, if I can put it that way. And certainly I believe that in the last 3 years plus, we've been very focused on this. But we are on the right-wing threat. But we are delighted that we now have also the even greater focus from other agencies, not just MI5, but in government and local authorities as well, a greater understanding from people about the nature of this issue, and a very healthy, I'd say, and high number of referrals to it.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Right. Assembly Member Arbour, if you can take charge, please, for my
Yes,
question.
of course. Do go ahead, Chairman.
Thank you very much. My question on hate crime is both to Mr. Mayor and Deputy Mayor. Why has there been an increase in hate crime since the emergence of COVID? And what can we do from City Hall to fight the hatred and promote tolerance? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Thanks, Nabil. I'll bring Sophie in shortly. But you're right, we've seen a huge increase, particularly in hate crime against the East and Southeast Asian origin community in London. And there's a link, we think, between use of language from the current president of the USA calling the coronavirus, inverted commas, the Chinese virus, leading to ignorance, prejudice, and ultimately violence against our fellow Londoners who are of East and Southeast Asian origin, so-called xenophobia. We've been doing some work now with these communities. The police have been excellent going into the communities to build up confidence to encourage this crime to be reported. We're supporting a number of the advocacy groups as well. And I'll bring in Sophie just to give you an example of some of the work we're doing with these communities to build up confidence, but also to tackle this as well, including removing them off various social media sites as well.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks a lot. Yes, I mean, there's obviously the work of the Metropolitan Police in tackling hate crime and being really clear of trying to encourage people to come forward and report, because we have seen such a worrying increase. Our role, in one of the roles that we have, is investing in the services for victims of hate crime. And the Mayor has invested record amounts in his administration in services for victims of hate crime, and we have also invested in community organisations and community groups who, through the Shared Endeavour Fund, which is really about prevention and early intervention in tackling hate, really trying to build those links between communities to make sure that there is that understanding, there is the social cohesion, so that platform for hate can't take root. The Shared Endeavour is about £800,000 and is investing in over 30 community-based projects across London, with some fantastic work in schools, online and through community and faith groups in tackling hate.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm going to stop my question here and we can move on to the next question. Thank you, Assembly Member Arbour. Next question is from Assembly Member Ashlomi. Thank you.
All right.
Assembly Member Ashlomi. Let's move on to the question from Assembly Member McCartney.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask a question firstly to the Commissioner, and it is around county lines and gangs. Can you just update us as to what progress has been made in tackling county lines and gangs that operate them, and how important that is to reducing violent crime in London?
Sorry,
Well,
did you indicate? Carry on. Sorry.
I mentioned earlier on county lines and my pride in the work that we've been doing, and I think it is a significant impact and a significant change And when I see that, for the third year in a row, that we've seen a reduction in stabbings of young people under 25, which is my key metric, I think it is partly to do with the work that we've been doing against county lines. We've arrested since November 432 county line holders or their immediate associates. We've charged in total 836 offences. We've closed 230 lines. And in so doing, we ourselves, the Met, have actively rescued a number of people from exploitation. But the key to this is the county lines business model. These are London gangs who are running local networks, sometimes exploiting children locally, but are going out to other forces areas and up to Scotland, out to Wales, down to Devon and Cornwall, 20 other forces we've been working really closely with. And our coordinated approach, and frankly our quite high-tech approach, is infinitely more efficient than we or any police service were able to do a couple of years ago. And so from the moment that we find out about a line and a line holder, it's often only a matter of about 3 weeks or 4 weeks before we can go and arrest them with very strong evidence, which means that we know that they are going to be charged and we know they're going to be remanded in custody. We're also using legislation quite imaginatively, bringing a lot more to justice for the exploitation and slavery offences, which of course get much longer sentences, and also there are various other conditions and orders that can be put on by a court. So, we are really busy on this. We're lucky because Graham McNulty, who many of you know, is showing great leadership around this issue nationally and in London. And along the way, as well as closing the lines, we're told by the other forces, wherever they may be, I was talking to Norfolk just the other day, the violence in that area is much reduced. The children are being safeguarded. The key underlying thing, of course, is the demand for drugs, and that remains. But the county lines are particularly pernicious in their business model, particularly nasty in relation to children, particularly violent. And when we smash up a county line, we affect a London gang considerably. And as I say, just this week, we've arrested 19 people.
Thank you very much. And my second question is for the Mayor. Mr. Mayor, the rescue and response programme that you're funding has been extremely successful in rescuing and supporting young Londoners who have fallen foul of exploitation from these vicious gangs. And you've recently announced a further £750,000 of funding for that programme. But can I ask you, what was the impact of closing schools during the first lockdown, and how are you assessing the effect of that?
Yeah, good question. So the Commissioner talked about the brilliant work taking place in relation to enforcement in relation to county lines. But there are two other parts of the equation. One is stopping vulnerable people being targeted by gang leaders. And two is, once the police have stepped in with the enforcement, how we ensure those vulnerable people are given assistance through rescue and response. And the question you referred to is the first part of the equation, the targeting of young people. And so we've been concerned about places where young people congregate being targets, pupil referral units, schools, and chicken shops, frankly speaking. And an amazing stat we discovered through the work we're doing is 43% of those school-aged children who are involved in county lines weren't in mainstream education. And that's why I don't apologise for investing in the Young Londoners Fund. I don't apologise for investing in the Violence Reduction Unit. I don't apologise for investing in rescue and response. The good news is, once we get involved, we can turn these young people's lives around, so they not only are being kept safe, they're not involved in criminality, but they are constructive members of society. It's a win-win.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That seems to be a very constructive piece of work. Thank you.
Right. We have difficulty in getting Assembly Member Ashlomi to join, but in the meantime, can we move on to a question from Assembly Member Dr. Moore, please?
Thank you, Chair. My question is for the Mayor or Deputy Mayor. How important is it that the coronavirus crisis does not lead to a new era of austerity from this government with regards to funding of the Metropolitan Police?
Well, it's a big concern that I've got. So over the last 10 years, we, the Met Police Service, have lost around £900 million from our budget over the last 10 years. That's led to reduction in police officers, reduction in community support officers, reduction in police staff, and a number of other issues that you've seen. At the same time, we know that we receive about £160 million less than we should, being a national, international capital city in relation to the grant we should be receiving. The other issue is this year the Met Police Service has spent around £50 million dealing with the pandemic, a variety of issues, personal protective equipment, social distancing, and other issues that led to monies being spent. So there are two issues here, Alison. One is making sure we get back the money that was spent over and above what the police would normally spend, the £50 million. The second issue is we can't have a new era of austerity. And the key thing is for the government to realise that we've still got to find further savings as a result of them requiring us to actually make £1 billion worth of savings. But also we are losing about 7% of council tax receipts for obvious reasons. People now receiving benefits rather than paying council tax. And we're losing about 11% of business rates receipts for the obvious reasons that businesses are going bust. And so we need the government to realise, unless they step in to help us, there'll be a new era of austerity. So the sort of progress we've made that the Commissioner rightly has really proudly referred to could be undone. None of us wants to see that.
Thank you. And you've been very clear about the government providing the 6,000 officers that London deserves out of that national 200,000. The government spending review announced national funding for police officers, and I want to ask you, have they said how many of these officers are for London, and has the Prime Minister guaranteed that you will get the 6,000 officers that you need?
No, I think, Alison, you misspoke. You said 200,000 officers. I wish it's 20,000 officers.
Sorry, I did, yes.
Don't worry. 20,000 officers over 3 years. And I'll just remind you, we've lost 21,000 officers over the last 10 years. So even with all 20,000 returned to England and Wales, our population's grown, crime's more sophisticated, officer numbers will still be down in 2 years' time. So we received about 1,300 officers in year one. We should have received 2,000, and we should hopefully receive the other 4,700 over the next 2 years. We've not been told the officers will be receiving for the next year. This year's officers, we've got an idea of. The problem, Alison, is Caroline Pigeon referred to our estate. The Commissioner needs to plan in relation to our estate, in relation to police officers, in relation to the balance and mix around the BCUs of senior officers and junior officers. And so our ask of the government is let us know how many officers we'll receive over the next 2 years so we can plan going forward. The fair and proportionate allocation should be 6,000 of the 20,000.
Thank you very much. And finally, to the Commissioner, what impact has the reduced funding for both the police and the justice system had on being able to bring perpetrators to justice in recent years? And can we expect improvements in this area if we get additional officers in the Met?
Just half a minute, Commissioner, please, if you're looking for a challenge. Here it is, half a minute.
It's certainly been challenging until latterly to do anything other than see a reduction in the number of people being brought to justice in the United Kingdom generally. A whole host of reasons for that, of which funding and sort of capability capacity of police services would be just one. We have managed to turn that tanker around, and we're beginning to increase the number of people brought to justice. But I look into the next year and I am concerned, as I say, about the ability of the criminal justice system to deal with those numbers. But undoubtedly, as we grow, we are arresting more people, we're putting more people through custody, and we hope to bring more people to justice. There are some other changes that are happening in terms of process, like the disclosure rules, which may make it slightly harder in the short term for my officers that I'm concerned about. But it's my sort of third big operational priority is to continue to increase the number of people coming to justice. I see next year a threat from the state of the criminal justice system to be able to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Labour Group is now out of time, so I will now move on to a question we have on Policing Action Plan from Assemblymember Barry. Assemblymember Barry.
Chair, thank you. This is the submitted question, which I believe that the team have, or do I need to ask it?
Please do ask.
Great. Okay, so my question as submitted is, what difference will your new action plan for transparency, accountability and trust in policing make, and how will you measure its impact?
Is that to me?
It was submitted in advance, so whichever one of you has decided to answer it.
Sure, I can take it, Commissioner, if you want me to. Thank you. There's no doubt in my mind that the Met Police Service has made significant and positive steps since the tragic murder of Stephen Lawrence and the subsequent public inquiry. Today, the Met Police Service is more representative, more transparent and more accountable than at any time in its history. The MPS does do a remarkable job keeping our city safe. It's crucial, though, that the police have confidence themselves to use the powers they have to bear down on violent crime, but also crucial that the police have the trust and confidence of all Black Londoners. And it's clear that more needs to be done to achieve this, and that's why we've published the action plan. It's to address the community concerns about the disproportionate use of police powers on Black Londoners and to improve transparency, accountability and trust and confidence. And as I said in answer to the previous question, the plan seeks to change the way the community is involved in recruitment, in training and on scrutiny of the police. There's additional money, £1.7 million towards investing in community involvement that I know Sophie discussed with you yesterday. There are a number of ways we're going to measure success. Increasing public confidence is really important to allow greater transparency and accountability. You'll be aware of the metrics that already exist to do that. Sophie Linden will be co-chairing a board alongside an independent co-chair, bringing in community voices and expertise. The public attitude survey of MOPAC will be really important. We want to see, Sean, increased confidence in the police and a reduction in concerns there are around disproportionality. This is a partnership piece of work between the police, City Hall and the diverse communities of London. And I mean by that, of course, the Black communities in London.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I can stick with you for a moment, just to go back to the goals and measurement question. So about the goals, I think you'll agree with me that improved perceptions are not the same as improved outcomes, and that increased confidence isn't the same thing as enhanced respect for human rights on the ground or reduced disproportionality. And although, I mean, there's lots that's positive in this action plan in terms of lots of planned actions, there's so much that's good in here, but there are a few warning signs in it. I mean, for example, at the equality impact assessment, the strategic outcomes are first, improved perceptions, and second, more proportionate police tactics. I'm not sure that's the right order. And then the disproportionality scrutiny group, which I think you mentioned, that will be convened, where it talks about that within the plan, it says it will be to increase confidence that these powers are being used fairly and proportionately. And I think we mainly all agree now that there isn't proportionality currently, and that does need to be fixed. So are you confident that the goals you've set are the right ones and in the right priority order in terms of outcomes and impact?
Yeah.
And in terms of measurement, I think there's obviously a lot of actions planned and things will emerge from those actions. And the progress monitoring of this plan seems to be mainly in terms of keeping an eye on the completion of the actions and the progress of the actions. You'll be reporting back on that, I think, quarterly, I think is what it says. That's good, but it also isn't the same as assessing the achievement of the goals of reduced disproportionality. So are you going to be producing new KPIs to go with this? Or I think it's implied by the report, this will wait for the next mayor's new police and crime plan.
Yeah, so we've set out in the action plan, there are 42 actions, but the timelines, I think the Commissioner on day one already ticked off one of them, which is to change the rules around police officers' residency. And so we've deliberately set out action plans which can be actioned sooner rather than later, rather than wait until the end and somebody marking homework. The police and crime plan clearly has got a particular legal framework, which is why that's a peg that we've used. And the important thing is, rather than redrafting an action plan by committee, the action plan was the fruits of a lot of work with communities, with the police service, and City Hall. So that's why we're quite keen to avoid the additional expense in adding new metrics when there already exist metrics which provide quite a good benchmark, and it means we can compare apples with apples.
Okay, that's useful to know. And yeah, when we do make a new mayor's police and crime plan, we can change those metrics. And I hope the disproportionality scrutiny group will be producing goals that are measurable outcomes as well. Can I switch to the Commissioner now for something rather specific, which is about training on the impact of unconscious bias? This is something we've discussed quite a few times, notably in June when we discussed the disproportionate use of coronavirus powers on Black Londoners. There's quite a lot of new training in the plan. We've got new recruits being trained on the impact of unconscious bias. We've got new recruits getting 3 days talking about de-escalation of potential conflict. And then we've got a cultural awareness toolkit, which I believe will be available to all officers and used in initial training. But can you tell me whether all officers are now going to have the training in the impact of unconscious bias? And do you have a target date for when all officers will have had this training?
No, I don't have either. It is the case that a very large proportion of the workforce, but I can't tell you how many because of the churn and the move and all that sort of thing, have already had unconscious bias training. And we are committed to doing that, as you've heard, with our new recruits and for certain other specialist officers and officers who might be engaged in particular activities. But I firmly believe that it is not the whole answer. And hence, this is part of a suite of packages and indeed a suite of training, a kind of golden thread through all our training. And one example is involving the community far more in the delivery of training to our officers. We're committed to it, but you'll know that some of the research on unconscious bias training is patchy at best. We believe that this will help, but it's only one thing, and I haven't set out for every single officer to have that training. A large number of us already have. Many times, actually.
I wanted to follow it up because we've asked about it before. Can I now switch for another rather specific question to the Deputy Mayor, Sophie? I think you're the right person to ask about this. It's about the body-worn video and the viewing of body-worn video by the community research groups, which seems now to be fixed. And then after you talk about that in the action plan, it says that MOPAC and the MPS will start work to research a sample of body-worn video to examine the nature of stop and search interactions and understand more about how they are experienced in a very sort of qualitative sense. This is great, and this actually is something I wrote to you and the Met about, asking essentially that if I could come and do that kind of research on the body-worn video while it wasn't being seen by the community groups. And I was turned down on the basis that nobody was at that time allowed to see any of the body-worn video. Now, this is so similar to my proposal. I wanted to ask whether, first of all, Assembly members could get more of a report on that research project, whether there's any independent people involved in it, because obviously MOPAC and the MPS are MOPAC and the APS. And also whether it would be possible for me to get more details and possibly to come and observe some of the sessions in that project, seeing as it's so similar to what I asked about.
Thanks, Sian. I mean, I think it is going to be a really interesting piece of work, really drilling down on the body-worn video, but not just looking at the body-worn video. It will also interview officers about what their decision-making process was, and then you can see the journey of the interaction with the individual on the street. In terms of your specific question, MOPAC is working with the Met on this. We are just really finishing off the scope and a scope for it, and there will be some independent academic rigour around it and independent academic assessment of it. I'm really happy once it's got going to make sure that we let you know where it is and to update you on where it is. I'm not sure how it will actually, the process of how it will take place. If we can involve people, of course we'll involve people, because it's really important that everybody sees this as a really robust academic piece of independent research.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, that's all my questions, but all the Assembly members have had a little bit of extra time today. So just to say, this is really positive, and the actions as they progress, we must keep an eye on them as assembly members and make sure they
very,
go
very
on.
briefly, please.
I can't see this
They're out of time.
doing any harm at all, and it's a very positive step. The question is, how quickly will we do it? What the outcomes will be, and how.
And
we
I just
can-
wanted to. Could I just? Yeah,
Sorry.
Just really quickly come back.
Literally
on the
10 seconds, please.
Not 10 seconds. I will. It's not just the actions that are going to be reported. As you know, we've got a commitment to reduce the race equality audit. Within that, you'll have outcomes from the public access strategy and a public attitude survey, and you will also be able to see,
Thank you.
shifts in the outcomes as well.
Thank you very much. Let's quickly move on to a question on Londoners' safety by Assembly Member O'Connell, please.
Thank you. Chair, can I just check with Steve? This is for me.
Steve.
Initially, I think from you, Mr. Mayor, because it's asking about your record, please.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Chair. When I became Mayor, violence had been rising across the country, including London, since 2014. Serious youth violence since 2012. We are by no means complacent, but are now seeing key indicators of violence reducing in London. Pre-COVID, the number of victims of knife crime with injury aged under 25 had fallen by a quarter. Homicides are also down. Since I became Mayor, burglary offences have reduced, violence with injury has reduced, youth violence has reduced, and gun crime have all reduced. Throughout my mayoralty, I've been tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. Against a backdrop of government cuts, I've invested record amounts in policing from City Hall by diverting business rates and taking the difficult decision to increase council tax to support this vital work. This has funded a new dedicated violent crime task force with nearly 300 police officers focused on the areas worst affected, while also improving diversity amongst officers and restoring neighbourhood policing. There is also a new 600 officer plus violence suppression unit across our city. Enforcement, though, only suppresses violence rather than addressing its causes. So we've established England's first violence reduction unit to tackle root causes of crime. We've also invested nearly £4 million, as you've heard, in the rescue and response programme, reducing involvement in county lines amongst those referred to the programme by 60%. But the reality is that the government cuts to the police and preventative services have made it much harder. Since 2013-14, the Met Police Service has been forced to deliver almost £900 million in savings, resulting in officer numbers falling to below 30,000 in mid-2018, a 15-year low. London still has no further clarity on the allocation of the 20,000 officers promised nationally. I'll continue to make the case for 6,000 officers. The impact of the pandemic is forecast to cost the Met up to £50 million, so I've called on the Home Sec to provide urgent support to protect our police from a new era of austerity. I'm proud of my record on keeping our city safe, but it's vital the government reverse their damaging cuts for good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to echo colleagues' comments about thanking our officers for all the work that they've done over the previous months in very difficult circumstances, and particularly thank them for the work against violence in these recent months. So, Commissioner, thank you through yourself on that. I think it's timely now, really, to reflect on your record, Mr. Mayor, over 4 years. This is not a reflection on the Commissioner's 2 years. That's not my noises coming out. So, Mr. Mayor, listening to what you've got to say, I have to say I don't necessarily recognise some of those figures, and the figures I get are coming from the Met dashboard, but we'll put that to one side. So your predecessor, Mr. Mayor, left office with far lower crime levels than he found at the beginning. Are you saying that you are on course to do the same?
Well, there's a number of ways to answer that question. The first thing is my predecessor left City Hall with a decline in police officer numbers. As I said, we've lost 21,000 officers across the country, thousands in London, and I'd remind you, he left me with a legacy of 76 police stations being closed, 65% of our community support officers being cut, 30% of our police staff being cut. So not a great legacy. The good news is, as the Commissioner referred to earlier on and I referred to just now, we are seeing a huge reduction in the key metrics that concern Londoners. Violent crime going down, violence with injury going down, those above 25, knife crime with injury going down, gun crime going down, burglary going down. So no complacency on our part. We are seeing progress made, being both tough on crime around the enforcement side, but tough on the cause as well by reinvesting in the youth services that have been starved of investment over the last 10 years.
Thank you for that. I mean, I'll take that as a response to this kind of no in response to my question about leaving it lower when and if you leave this term as opposed to the beginning. I mean, the figures that I have from the dashboard, we don't want to exchange too much time on over a whole range of figures, but and I'm taking importantly pre-COVID figures because I think that is a fair on you and fair on Londoners reflection on your record. So I have rape going up by a quarter, robbery 3/4, and burglary, a particularly important neighbourhood crime, going up by something of a third, which is from the beginning of your term to pre-COVID. So I'm not sure that I recognise all those figures. But if I may, I'd like to turn to the issue about funding, because you mentioned at the beginning, in your words, a decade of austerity, and of course that decade included your predecessor. And in fairness, your predecessor did reduce crime. So how do you answer that? Because your predecessor left crime figures lower than yourself, and he faced the same cuts. How do you respond to that?
I think you're in danger, Steve, of using the fantasy figures that your mirror candidate uses. So up until the Olympics, the government rightly was ensuring that police officer numbers didn't drop in London. In 2010. I'll use May 2010 for obvious reasons. In May 2010, London had 33,260 officers. If you want to make a note, Steve, 33260. When you compare the police officers in London versus the population in London in May 2010, it was 4.1 officers per 1,000. Those are the truthful figures, the accurate figures. Let's fast forward to the consequences of government cuts. London's population is going up. Police officer numbers are going down. So that leads to a situation where officer numbers fall to 29,924, below 30,000 for the first time since 2003. Right. So the police officer number versus 1,000 is 3.3. So not unsurprisingly, those cuts have consequences. At the same time, though, as police officer numbers going down, we've got youth services decimated. Youth clubs closing down, youth workers out of job, young people without constructive things to do. And not surprisingly, crime went up. Serious youth violence started going up in 2012, 4 years before I became mayor. Violence started going up in 2014, 2 years before I became mayor. So I'm afraid the real facts don't fit with the political narrative, but they are what they are.
I know, and you're moving the debate onto police numbers away from performance under your record. Now, you all know that I supported this assembly, and I actually wrote the letter as chair of the Police and Crime Committee to the government, because I think London deserves a better settlement. But the fact that there has been more money coming to the Met Police. So, Mr. Mayor, just continuing along this train of thought, the increase in officers, is it your understanding, and this was something for the Commissioner as well, that those new officers, the 6,000, we hope, will be going on the front line? Is that your understanding, Mr. Mayor?
Well, maybe the Commissioner should answer the operational issue about where they go.
Yeah.
It's really important that she deals with that. It's really important also to make the point, Steve, that the government needs to, in addition to giving money for police officers, needs to give the ancillary support we need for police officers. When it talks about the other additional bits and pieces that police officer cost, the kit, the estate, and all the other issues as well. So it's really important we get that. And also, you'll be aware, Steve, that the cost of a police officer in London is far more expensive than the cost of a police officer in other parts of the country. But I'll let the Commissioner answer as to where she would like to have these police officers.
I'll go on to an exchange with the Commissioner in a minute, but I'll have one last question for you, then I have one or two questions for the Commissioner. I mean, last year at our exchange, Mr. Mayor, I wanted to bring attention to your record over 4 years. I think it's appropriate at this particular time. Your prime responsibility clearly is to keep Londoners safe, and they will be the judge of that in a few months' time. So my point, Mr. Mayor, is from the figures that I've got, crime figures have gone up under your term, and so I don't recognise your statement that your figures are reduced compared to the beginning of the term. Could you just briefly respond to that?
Sure. Burglary offences have reduced since May 2016. Violence with injury has reduced since May 2016. Youth violence has reduced since May 2016. Gun crime has reduced since 2016. But Londoners aren't stupid. Londoners know that the government's cut police officer numbers, the government's cut community support officers, the government's cut police staff. Now, you try and say don't discuss police officer cuts. I'm asking you about crime. That's because you don't seem to understand the link between cuts.
I well understand.
Police officers going down and crime going up. And clearly, neither does the government, which is why they've allowed us to lose 21,000 officers across the country over the last 10 years and replace them with 20,000 over the next 2 years and the current year. I think they think Londoners are stupid. They're not, and we'll see what the Londoners think next May.
They're not stupid, and they voted for a mayor to keep them safe, and they will be the judge of that in a few months' time. Commissioner, can I turn to you, if I may? Just a brief point about those new officers that we very much welcome. Frontline?
Thank you. Yes. I know you do very regularly. You speak to officers out on the front line now. They will have noticed the extra officers coming their way, the droves in the New Street duty courses. We've discussed them. They are going into the front line. The new individuals, of course, are working right out locally in the front line. On occasion, their new presence allows us to move experienced people into specialist crime. I know you don't want to talk about the last few months because of COVID. It's very hard to understand exactly what is a COVID effect. But what I can show you is record numbers of arrests in recent times, record numbers of seizures of guns, knives and drugs and cash. They are very busy, and that is what we've been doing with the investment by the government and the mayor over the last couple of years. It's made a palpable difference to our ability to suppress violence on the streets and bring people to justice. And the next set, however many they are, we still don't know what we're getting for next year. We want to know that as soon as possible. Absolutely, they will be supplementing the front line. But my last point is we do have a deficit in our finances. Those of you at the Budget and Performance Committee know this for next year still, that we need to fill, and a bigger gap the following year. And any police service in the modern age needs some police staff, professional, skilled people, as well as police officers, and it needs also to have technology and kit to support the officers. So there is a balance here, and we will be looking at how we get that balance right.
That's good. I wish you well on that. My last comment is really a thanks for the work that the violence suppression units, the task force and others have done in suppressing violence over these last few months. Thank you very much. That will be Chair.
Right. Next question is from Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, can I just briefly echo everybody's thanks to your brave officers, and of course best wishes to your officer that was assaulted last night. Terrible to hear that, really terrible. Now moving on to Mayor. Obviously, Mr. Mayor, you want our streets of London as safe as possible. So given that there was a deportation flight last week that attracted a lot of attention, do you still hold the same views on deportation flights as you did earlier this year?
I think you're in danger of believing all the facts you read in some selected quotes from the Home Sec rather than understanding that one of the concerns many of us have is we've seen a hostile environment, which means that many people who are British for all intents and purposes are being deported to country of origin when they've got no connections there. So what we're in favour of is not secrecy, but actually a proper process being followed. And I'm somebody who believes in due process, natural justice, and the rule of law. And I'd rather have independent judges deciding the status of people who have been deported, rather than those people being deported in at night without proper scrutiny. If it is the case that somebody is here without proper permission to remain, and they've committed a crime, at the end of their sentence, of course, the law allows them, and they should be deported to country of origin. But if that person is British, there's no reason why they should be deported to a country with which they've got no links. And in that circumstances, once they've done the crime, they should be released into the community, hopefully being rehabilitated. And it's really important for us to recognise that actually we've got a situation where the public doesn't have confidence in the government's process and procedures in relation to assessing the status of many of those of the Windrush generation and their children.
Well, I think you're conflating two issues there. Would you not argue that if people are not born in this country, they no longer have the right to live here if they break our laws? And let me just give you some examples, Mr. Mayor. We're talking about rapists, murderers, drug dealers, child sex offenders, individuals convicted of GBH, grievous bodily harm, firearms offences, importing drugs, attempting murder, manslaughter. Our Commissioner spoke
so movingly about Matt Ratner earlier. It's absolutely vital that we move these vile individuals whenever we can out of the country. Do you not agree with that?
Well, I'm surprised you don't agree with the British principles of the rule of law, natural justice and due process. I'm unclear why you're so scared of people having access to lawyers and having access to courts.
I'm not scared of that, Mr. Mayor. I am determined that we should use every available opportunity to remove these sort of vile criminals.
I think you forgot to say the word lawful.
No, just a minute, I'm not finished.
And what's really important is
of London.
the law, natural justice and due process. They're quintessentially British.
If they weren't born in the country and they don't have the correct papers, they've committed murders, they've committed rapes, and God knows what else. They should not be on the streets of London. You ask our police to do an incredible service for us. They manage to find these villains, lock them up, and then you put everything in their way that they are not deported. We are safer if these individuals are deported. Would you not agree with that?
I think we're safer if we all respect the rule of law, natural justice and due process. Their values we've proudly exported around the world. It was British lawyers who drafted the European Convention of Human Rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They're one of our best exports, and I'm really proud that everybody in this country is entitled to access to justice. I'm really proud that we've got the most independent judges who are uncorruptible, who ensure there is due process followed. I'm just unclear why you're scared of these British values of these British judges assessing whether people have the right to remain or they should be deported after due process.
Do you object in principle to the deportation flights?
I've got no objection to criminals who are foreign being deported after due process.
Well, we have run over 30 enforced returns and charter flight operations to countries included Albania, France, Germany, Ghana, Lithuania, Nigeria. I could go on. And yet you've particularly objected to a couple of flights earlier this year.
I'm quite clear. Human rights are for everyone who's a human being. It doesn't matter whether your flight is going to Albania, Jamaica, or any other part of the world. I think everyone is entitled to due process, is entitled to make sure that the rule of law is followed, and there should be natural justice. I'm unclear why you're so against those things.
Mr. Mayor, I'm quite clear that if there is an opportunity of removing murderers, rapists, child molesters, etc. from our streets, we should do everything that we can in order to do that. And I think if you ask Londoners if they would like these people removed, what do you think their answer would be?
I think they would like politicians to follow the rule of law, natural justice and due process rather than playing to a gallery.
Well, they are, and the simple fact is certain people are putting things in the way to stop these villains being on our streets, and we should be doing everything we can to help the police get these villains off our streets. I mean, if I can ask you, Commissioner, in your view, does the removal of serious foreign offenders from the streets of London make London a safer place?
I'm obviously not going to comment on your conversation there, or indeed the latest sort of controversy about the flights. But what I can say is that for many, many years, we have been highly alert to the fact that London, as a highly international city, does have a fairly high number of people who are both victims and indeed offenders living or visiting our city. And we have to be really good at identifying in the relation to offenders, particularly serious offenders, who they are, where they come from, and assisting other authorities when it is appropriate with immigration matters. So we do take what we call the sort of category of foreign national offenders very seriously. I don't mean that in a way that's disrespectful to anybody at all, but absolutely there will be occasions in which, I'm sure everybody would agree, when somebody finishes a sentence for a serious crime, it is absolutely appropriate in the law that they are returned to wherever they came from. Some people, I'm not talking about this particular flight, but some people we find have been here more than once and been deported. And we do have, the more serious the criminality, the more seriously we will take it, and we will work closely with obviously the criminal justice system, the prisons, and indeed the immigration authorities to provide the information. London is an international city. We have international criminals here. We need to be able to work effectively internationally, and people who are no longer entitled for whatever reason to live in this country, of course, we will assist the authorities, other authorities in having them deported appropriately.
Thank you. Well, I agree appropriately, but I will say to you, to our Mayor, as a Londoner, and on behalf of the majority by far of Londoners, we do not want these vile creatures on our streets. And if there is any way within the law that they can be removed, we are absolutely for them being removed. Thank you, Chairman.
Chair, it's useful that this conversation led to the member referring to within the law. That's a useful position. This tutorials provide anything useful.
You.
Thank
you, Mr. Mayor.
Of staying within the law.
Need to move on.
The exchange for those reasons.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, we need to move on. Thank you. Next question is from Assembly Member Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Can I just start by echoing the comments made by my colleagues around the conduct of police on streets, and also pass on our warm prayers to your officer who is wounded. Let's hope that he recovers quickly. I'd also like to add to that, actually. I think the work that the Met has done in the lockdown period around getting some of the more serious criminals off our streets has been very well done. I think you need to be commended on that, your officer and yourself. It was a good plan executed properly. I think that was really well done. I'd like to commend you on that. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor. Can I just ask you about the makeup of the police force? Of course, to get decent intelligence from communities, to boost our model of policing by consent, the look of the police, the makeup of the police is very important. We've had lots of conversations around this morning. But what will you be doing in particular to boost that number? Because if we go at the rate we're going now, it's going to take multiple decades to reach the target you have set. And the target is very nice, it sounds great, but what are you going to change to accelerate the programme to get anywhere near that target in a useful time frame?
Sure, Chair. I'm really sorry the members that read the excellent 41-page report, the action plan, which sets out exactly what we're going to do. I'm happy to read the various pages that explain the stuff we're going to do, but in summary, we're going to involve the community when it comes to targeting diverse communities to recruit, in particular, black officers and black Asian minority officers. We've also set aside £1.7 million to assist in targeting communities to help us recruit from the diverse communities who are underrepresented in the police service. We're going to also increase confidence amongst those communities by involving them when it comes to some of the assessment work that the Met Police Service does when it comes to recruits. There's the pool of people we recruit from, there's a process when it comes to recruitment, there's the retention, and there's the progression. One of the things that the Commissioner's already announced, and I'm sorry that the member missed this, was on the day we published the action plan, that she has reverted to the original residency requirement that we had previously in relation to, I think, 3 of 6 years, the last 6 years, to either live or study in London. That means the pool we're recruiting from is more diverse than the pool otherwise would be across England and Wales. We're also engendering a greater confidence amongst black, Asian, minority ethnic communities by some of the other work the community is doing. Sophie Linden referred to some of this as to the Commissioner in relation to the training of officers, really, really important, but also in relation to the scrutiny of officers, and that will lead to more confidence amongst Londoners. Sophie's Linden set aside £300,000 in particular to focus on black Londoners, because we want more black Londoners to join the police service. And what the Commissioner has done in relation to targets, aspirations, is to have 3 big ones that are really relevant in relation to our objective. One is to increase the number of new recruits to 40% over the next 2 years. So 40% of new recruits by 2022, and we want to black, Asian, minority ethnic, a significant number of those being black under the umbrella of black, Asian, minority ethnic. And the Commissioner also has 9% and 7% respectively inspectors and sergeants. So she's keen not just to recruit and retain, but progress. Because what will give confidence to black Londoners in particular, confidence to join the police service, is when they see in senior positions of the police service more people who look like them. And that's why I'm really keen to follow that through. And the other point that's worth stressing is that the Commissioner and I are really proud of the diversity amongst our police staff, the diversity amongst our community support officers, and the diversity amongst our cadets. So we're also trying to encourage them to pivot where sensible towards joining the police service as police officers as well. That's just a flavour of some of the things we're going to do, but I'll make sure my office emails you the action plan, which has got more detail about some of the stuff we're doing.
I've seen the plan, and I didn't see anything in it that was significantly a change that would accelerate the process, because of course you're very, very far behind the figures that were set in the past. The ambitious figure you've set, which is great, I see nothing there that will accelerate you to get near it any time soon. That's why I asked the question. I think there's some confusion in your mind around what will encourage young black people to join the police force. Your own Jeanette Arnold just said, hand on heart, she couldn't tell someone from our community to join that. That's why I asked the question. What in particular are you going to do? Not what's in your big fancy plan, because that plan, much of it is not that innovative, and we've seen a situation we're very, very far behind.
Well, I'm really
so what's the next
really
question,
happy
please?
to compare and contrast my record over 5 years in increasing diversity with the previous guy's record of increasing diversity over 8 years. And you'll see, Chair, over the last 4 years, we've actually increased the number of black Asian minority ethnic officers from around 3,000 to 5,000. We have more black Asian minority ethnic officers in London than the rest of England and Wales put together.
Okay.
With any other mayor in the history of the police service.
Assembly Member Bailey, question, please. Yeah.
I was asking a question and the mayor interrupted me. So you put in the London residency requirement, your predecessor put it in, you took it out and you put it back in. Do you regret the decision to remove it in the first place? Have you had some different thinking there?
I think it's really important that somebody explains to the Assembly who is in charge of these things. What I'll do is explain to him it's an operational decision, and maybe I should let the Commissioner respond to his criticism. Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The decision about residency, I believe, was supported broadly by many people, including the Mayor, when I felt that I had to change away from that I think it was early 2018, my decision. And that was on the basis that we were suddenly getting a very welcome but unexpected income surge, which meant we needed to grow at a time when I knew that my officers were really struggling on the streets, where we had violent crime still rocketing in certain respects, and where I simply knew that our ability to recruit from London alone would not meet the numbers that I had the money to recruit, if you see what I mean. So I wanted to grow quickly, and I needed to go beyond London. And of course, we got some very talented people. But we did see, as expected, a very significant reduction in the diversity of the people arriving at Hendon. Despite that, we have had record numbers of black, Asian, minority ethnic people joining us, for example, in the last year. But I am very confident now that we have a fantastic recruiting machine. We have an enormous amount of interest in people joining us. It's not difficult to get people to want to join us. And that we can now re-implement the residency requirement, which is not universally popular, and I understand that. But for those people who live outside London and will desperately want to join the Met, including black, Asian, minority ethnic candidates, there are ways in which they can. They can come in through the direct entry scheme. They could come as a member of police staff and then join us as a police officer. They could come to study in London. They could be a special constable and then join us. So I still think that we'll get really talented people coming in from outside London, but we will undoubtedly make a big change again in the proportion, the percentage of our new recruits who are from London's diverse population. And secondly, they will have a head start when they go on the streets because of their understanding of London and London issues.
Can I just ask one additional question? You now have to have a degree to enter the police on full pay or undertake an apprenticeship to come in on a lower salary. Do you think that's going to present a bar to people from ethnic communities and also give you a two-tier system within the police?
So there are a number of different ways of entering. I've mentioned a couple of them already. We have, the Police Now scheme. We have direct entry detectives. We have the uniformed entry. There are still some exemptions. So, for example, if someone's been in the military, they will be able to, wherever they've been living, they'll be able to come in. But there are these two new, I think, very exciting entry routes starting in the new year. Our observation so far is that both are very attractive to black, Asian and minority ethnic candidates. That is the experience of other forces in metropolitan areas up and down the country who've gone earlier than we have to this. I'm particularly intrigued to see and want help from Assembly members and others to raise the profile of the apprenticeship scheme, because I think this will really appeal to many people, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. Yes, definitely. It's already showing high numbers, but also people who are, either immediately leaving college or have some people who are disadvantaged in a variety of different ways. I think this is a scheme that's going to appeal to people, actually, and I think we're going to end up with a more diverse workforce overall.
Sorry to cut you off, Commissioner. Just in the interest of time, so you actually see it as a bonus, not a problem. I
do broadly. We kept the sort of classic entry route open for a while. But now I've seen the amount of interest we have in the two new routes. I think overall it will result in greater diversity, and I mean that in the broadest sense, in terms of social mobility as well as ethnicity and other protected characteristics.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair. Back to you.
Thank you, Assembly Member Devenish, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to the Commissioner. Good evening, Commissioner. And can I also add my thanks to both you and our Borough Commander, Helen Harper, who I get lots of thanks for all her hard work and all your staff during this very difficult year. So thank you. My question is something different from what my colleagues have asked. I want to ask you about Sir Craig Mackay's review of action fraud, please. And what they concluded in that report, as I'm sure you'll remember, is the UK as a whole needs a, quote, new future. What has the Met itself, please, and I know the City of London are leading on much of this, but what have the Met themselves, please, done in terms of that new future, and perhaps the balance away from, if I can call it, conventional crime we've been speaking about all afternoon, to online crime, please?
Thank you. So Action Fraud, as you say, is hosted and run by the City of London Police, and the majority of Sir Craig's recommendations were for them. I think there were, by memory, 4 that applied to us, and we have implemented them. We, over the years, I think, have invested more in London proportionately in both cybercrime and fraud investigation than other forces have been able to up and down the country. And we've remained committed to that, despite some of the reductions in officer numbers. What I can say is that we are now getting a higher positive, sort of response, as in more people being brought to justice. So we're doing more investigations, we're bringing more people to justice, we're getting more successful judicial outcomes. And we also have highly successful money laundering teams who, as I've mentioned already, together with other colleagues, are seizing more cash, assets and freezing orders than they have certainly in my time. So this is an area of course, of huge scale, one that can have a horrible impact on individuals. We assess each referral we get, not just in terms of the scale of the crime, but in terms of the impact on the individual, the harm that it might cause to an individual. And I recognise that there's still too many that people feel are not investigated thoroughly enough, or where people feel very angry about what's happened to them. But it's an area of crime that, frankly, in the main, does need to be dealt with through prevention and protection from that crime, not least through proper cybersecurity and good education for people, rather than us trying to investigate every single one. At the top end, as you know, sadly, a lot of these crimes, these scams and that kind of thing, are perpetrated by people who are not in the United Kingdom. I'm sure all of the people on this call will have had one of those calls recently where you think, well, that's a scammer, and they seem to me to be calling from a long way away, and they probably are, I'm sorry to say, and they're very difficult for a police service, even of the scale and capability of ours, to find and bring to justice for obvious reasons, because they're in far-flung jurisdictions, sometimes protected by their own states and part of organised criminal gangs. So prevention is better than investigation, but I would say we are doing more than we have been, and more proportionately, I think we've been able to invest in this than most other forces.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll be very brief because we're run out of time, but do you think you have the right proportion of the Met staff and police officers proportioned to the way the world is moving in terms of more online crime? I know it's a very difficult question to answer.
Yeah. It is very difficult. I mean, you'll be aware perhaps of the huge increase that we've put in latterly in our online child sexual exploitation teams. You know, well over 100 new officers in there, and they're busy. They're really busy, sad to say. Of course, the National Crime Agency have a big capability in that, and they lead nationally. But our teams are kept very busy with that work. We've been trying to upskill all our officers and our relevant staff in their ability to investigate digitally, to understand crimes that are enabled online, whether that's harassment, exploitation, terrorism, all sorts of things. Of course, use the internet or digital processes in order to get, find and use victims. So we've been trying to improve the skills. We certainly have addressed the balance to some extent by investing more in, for example, online child sexual exploitation. But it is a very hard question to say what would be the ideal disposition. Going forward, it's clear that we'll need more digital skills, and we will need, together with our partners in the National Crime Agency, the intelligence agencies and beyond, to be able to do more and more work in the online sphere, that's for sure.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can I ask you perhaps to write with a bit more detail, particularly how many overall of your staff you actually have involved in this very difficult part of crime, in terms of all your online capabilities? That would be really helpful. And one final point on a completely different issue, and could you write to me on this, not answer it now, because you also said to AM Whittle, this is an ongoing investigation, but I do share his point of view in terms of when Charles Walker MP raises that particular issue last month, once it's out of the criminal justice system, I'd appreciate your views on that incident particularly, but obviously not when it's an ongoing investigation. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to say, it's very hard. I think the answer to the first question, I'm sorry, I will write, but it'll be very hard to give you a specific answer. If you think of your own life now, how much of it is spent online and how much of it is spent in so-called real world? For young people, it's probably 10 times more than you, if I might say so, towards online and not real, so to speak. And the same is true for my officers. Every officer has to be able to work online. Every officer has to be able to do some things online. There are only a very few who spend their whole life looking at purely online enabled crimes, and investigation has an element of all of it in it nowadays. So I'll do my best, but it's a hard one to answer.
Merry Christmas, Commissioner.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we got only a couple of minutes left for the last question from Assembly Member Buff. Andrew, Assembly Member Buff.
Apologies.
Couple of minutes, max.
Yes. To the Commissioner, could you write to me about what reviews there are into the BCU's sex work advisory role? Could you also include in that response what training do BCU sex work advisors receive? And I would like to ask also, could you confirm that you can do that for me?
I'll do my best, certainly, yep.
Well, as long as you write. You know.
Are we done?
What to Sophie Linden, I want to, if you could write to me and say what funding has been provided to the National Ugly Mug scheme in the past 2 years, and what services the Met has received from them. Write to me if you can. Can you do that for me?
Sure. Will do.
And to the Mayor, over a year ago, you made a helpful statement about how we needed an evidence base to assist a review on the effect of illegal drugs in London. You said at the time is right for our society to have an evidence-based conversation about cannabis, about the law, how it is enforced, and how we support those struggling with addiction, and that all Londoners will benefit if we can start a conversation that leads to a reduction in crime. A little while after that, I wrote to you, and you said that you were working out what the role of the Mayor could be. That was in November last year. Could you tell me what review you have made?
Yeah.
What progress there is on reviewing the situation of and the effects of drugs in London?
Half a minute.
You can guess where I'm going end the question, the answer, Andrew. But the beginning bit is we've done the scope and work. We've looked into this. Can I write you in relation to giving you?
Yes, you may. You may, because you're not going to be able to finish your sentence.
Unlike the other two, I'll happily write you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That does bring to a close our session on question and answers. Can I thank, on behalf of the London Assembly, the Commissioner, our Deputy Mayor and the Mayor for your answers. Thank you so much for sparing the time. The Assembly has now a few more items of business to deal with, but please feel free to leave the Teams call whilst we deal with those matters. Right.
Very much.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We now turn to the motion listed on the agenda in my name. Can I ask that Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Noted. Right, move on to the item on petitions. Can I ask Assembly Member Caroline Russell to present the petition listed on the agenda in her name, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll now read the prayer from the petition. We're calling on Sadiq Khan to use his powers and intervene for young people at risk of becoming homeless. The pandemic is pushing young renters into a crisis. Hundreds of thousands of young Londoners have asked family and friends to help put them up. From our research, nearly 150,000 Londoners have had to turn someone away. We're on the cusp of an explosion of youth homelessness. Too many are already sleeping on the streets. The Mayor must act now and put more money into GLA funding for specialist support for homeless young people. And so far, 1,057 people have signed this petition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Assembly to note the petition and agree that we forward the petition to the Mayor of London for his consideration?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. We now move on to the two motions that have been tabled. In accordance with Standing Order 4.2a and following discussions with the Assembly party groups, I have agreed to vary the time limits for speeches for the remainder of the meeting, so that the mover of a motion can speak for up to 5 minutes, seconder will have up to 3 minutes, and any other speeches up to 2 minutes, please. So on that note, can I invite Assembly Member Desai to move his motion, which I believe is seconded by Assembly Member Dismo. Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the motion I propose today is of real importance for the safety of Londoners. EU membership has meant that the Met Police have had access to several European criminal databases and other security tools. Amongst other benefits, these arrangements have allowed the Met to quickly access information about dangerous offenders who may have traveled into London from Europe, and to search for DNA and fingerprint data held by other EU member states. As things stand currently, the Met will lose access to all of this come the 1st of January 2021. I appreciate that the government is currently in the midst of crunch talks regarding the terms of the transition arrangements, though in a sense that makes today's motion all the more pertinent. Indeed, yesterday, the EU published their proposed contingency measures in the event of no deal being reached. If the government were to agree to these measures, and we don't know if they will, there will still be nothing, I repeat, nothing in these measures at all to cover the loss to the Met and to London for current EU security cooperation arrangements. Now let me be clear, this motion is in no way about reopening the whole debate on the merits of us remaining in the EU or not. I respect the result of the referendum. This motion is instead about ensuring a government does all it possibly can to ensure that the Met Office can continue to access vital policing tools that their officers use every day to keep us safe. To give members a brief idea, and I will keep this brief as an awful lot could be said on this, of the impact that all this will have in London, let us take the European Criminal Records Information System as an example. This allows the Met to check for any previous convictions held by an EU national in their home country or another EU member state, and can be used to determine how urgently police deal with an issue. The Met have used this tool over 100,000 times in just the last 4 years. Should no arrangement be reached to keep it in place, we will lose access to this entirely, falling back on time-consuming previous arrangements for checking overseas convictions. The European arrest warrant, which I'm sure members will have heard of, requires another EU member state to arrest and transfer a criminal suspect back to the UK to stand trial. The average time for extradition using the warrant at present is just 48 days, whereas if we fall back on the 1957 Council of European Convention on Extradition, as we will have to if no other arrangement is made, extradition under the convention will take up to a year, and in some cases much longer. Make no mistake, colleagues, we are talking about real, tangible, negative impact for policing and the safety of Londoners. This is not simply a political point, but an issue that the police themselves have serious concerns about, and one which will be upon us imminently if no agreement is reached. Both the National Police Chiefs Council and the National Crime Agency have both warned of a major operational impact from potentially losing such a wide range of law enforcement tools. You've got PROM, which gives us access to a European-wide fingerprints and DNA database. You've got the Schengen database, which gives us information about who is wanted or missing across the EU. The options we fall back on are undoubtedly worse than the arrangements in place until the 31st of December. The Met Commissioner recently said the Police Committee that the alternatives will be slower and more costly, and that she imagines there will be cases in the new year where people will be saying, if we still had this European system or that, then things would have been different. So I'm asking members to lobby the government today, so we don't have to get to that point. So the dangerous criminals aren't let off the hook, so that Londoners don't have to be told, sorry, we can't track down who attacked you, as we have lost our ability to do so. There is still time, colleagues, even at this very late stage, to put in place some contingency plans on these crucial matters of safety. And so I hope that all members will vote for this important motion. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Before I invite other members to participate, can we just agree under Assembly standing orders to extend to extend the meeting under the appropriate standing orders? Yeah.
Agreed.
Thank you. Assembly Member Dismore, do you want to second formally now or reserve your right to speak?
Yes, I'll second formally and reserve my right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Pigeon has indicated.
Thank you, Chair. I am very happy to support this motion today. The prospect of the UK leaving the EU without an agreement by the 31st of December has, of course, led to much media attention, really focusing on the economic impact and problems for people wishing to trade. Issues such as Kent becoming a lorry park and businesses facing shortages of supplies have rightly received plenty of attention. Food shortages, price hikes are real concerns. However, just with the debate in the run-up to the 2016 referendum, issues of public safety have been overlooked. Elizabeth Manningham-Buller, a former Director General of MI5, warned that if we isolate ourselves, we would lose influence and put ourselves in greater peril. European cooperation has perhaps been most powerfully demonstrated in relation with the European arrest warrant. Speed of extradition is a huge benefit, and under the European arrest warrant it takes an average of 3 months compared to 10 months for non-EU countries. And people may need reminding that one of the greatest successes was the failed 21st of July London bomber Hussein Osman, who was returned from Italy in just 8 weeks. The European arrest warrant has also seen a significant number of foreign criminals either removed from British soil, and the 4 years between 2010 and 2014, I've got the figures that show that nearly 5,500 potential criminals were extradited to other EU countries, and some of these are concerns raised earlier by others, included 70 wanted on child sex offences, 100 for rape, 115 for murder, and 497 for drug trafficking charges. 4 years ago, Lord Harris
who was, of course, a former London Assembly member, former chair and long-standing member of the Metropolitan Police Authority, published an impressive report looking into what could be done to improve London's resources and readiness to respond to a major terrorist incident. And looking ahead in that to the consequences of Brexit, I think I can do no better than quote directly from him, because they sum up, his words sum up the predicament that we now face. And it just concluded, it is essential in the EU exit negotiations, the UK policing is able to maintain the required international arrangements that currently work to keep us safe. I fully support the motion.
Thank you very much. I do not have any further indications. So can I invite Assembly Member Dismore to speak in terms of seconding the motion?
Thank you, Chair. I put some of these problems to the Commissioner earlier on during the plenary question time, and also at the Police and Crime Committee last month. And I just find it absolutely extraordinary that the most senior police officer in the country has not been involved with the negotiations with the EU over policing and security, and didn't know what the arrangements were going to be. Today she was a little more diplomatic for obvious reasons, but I think it's absolutely incredible that the issue of policing and security has taken such a low profile compared to the trade arrangements. And on Thursday, Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, outlined a no-deal contingency arrangement. That was on Thursday, but made no reference in that to security, making it look as though not a lot is going to happen. And the EU so far has refused to carve out a separate security deal if the trade talks fail. So we are left very much in limbo. And one senior person after another has raised this. So the Commissioner raised it a month ago. Neil Basu, the Assistant Commissioner in charge of counter-terrorism, has also raised it and commented that they need the time to make the alternative arrangements. Yesterday, Lord Ricketts, the former National Security Advisor, raised it, commenting on all the things that we needed to do and the consequences of what's going to happen. For example, wanted notices for British criminals that have to be manually inputted into the Interpol service, and you need workarounds for all the various databases, which is going to take more time and effort. I just find it bizarre that we're now in this position. The Commissioner herself has said that we've had to second a lot more officers into actually doing this manual data checking work. People who ought to be out catching criminals on the streets are now stuck in front of computers trying to work out how to make all this work. We heard that Martin Hewitt, the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, has warned that losing the PROOM system, and this is to do with foreign criminals trying to get into the UK, never mind deporting them, Assembly Member Hall. Let's stop them getting in the first place. If we lose the PROOM system, it means we've got to revert to individual manual checks of data via Interpol channels on a case-by-case basis. Bearing in mind we've had tens of thousands of checks already under the existing system. This is a mess of the greatest order, and the government have been sleepwalking into failing in their most important duty to the people, that of keeping us safe. The most important of any government, the Conservatives have failed. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further indications, as I said before. Assembly Member Desai, you have a right to sum up, but you don't have to use the time. Over to you.
I'll be very brief. I assume that colleagues will support the motion, as no one has spoken against. As I say, to repeat, this motion is not about leave or remain, right? It's about some very serious matters that if you don't get an agreement that does not address our security concerns, then that would leave London and Londoners in a very bad position. All we are doing is asking the chair to write to the Home Secretary, calling upon the government to either reach an agreement with the EU to maintain current levels of security cooperation or provide urgent reassurances that adequate contingency measures are in place should an agreement not be reached. We have had warning signals from all over the place. This cuts across party political lines. Just yesterday, Tobias Elwood, chair of the Defence Committee, said that, talking about the security implications of no deal, that there will be economic repercussions, but also security ones. We need alliances, and Europe needs to stand and work together. And the Commissioner earlier said, in response to Assemblyman Davanish's question about action fraud, a lot of crime is committed internationally, and we need, in response to another question, we need to work effectively internationally. I think that says it all. Colleagues, please support this motion. It's in the interest of the safety of London and Londoners.
Thank you. Right, we need to put this to vote. Do I sense is that there is an agreement from Assembly to this motion? Right, I don't see any.
Assembly Member Hall is shaking her head. Chair.
Assembly Member Hall, are you in agreement? I can't hear you.
No.
No. Okay. We'll take the votes. Assembly.
Thank you, Chair. I will call Assembly members to vote in alphabetical order. Assembly members are asked to indicate whether they are voting for, against or abstaining on this motion. Assembly Member Arnold.
For.
Assembly Member Bailey.
Against.
Assembly Member Berry.
For.
Assembly Member Bath.
Against.
Assembly Member Cooper.
For.
Assembly Member Desai.
Most certainly for, and if I'd known members were going to object, then I would have quoted a few more Tory sources who actually, are worried
Assembly
about.
Member Desai, we've done the business. Thank you.
Assembly Member Devenish.
Against.
Assembly Member Dismal.
For.
Assembly Member Duval.
For.
Assembly Member Eshalemi.
For.
Assembly Member Gavram.
For.
Assembly Member Hall.
Against.
Assembly Member Curtin.
Missing.
I believe Assembly Member Curtin has left the call. Assembly Member McCartney.
For.
Assembly Member Dr. Moore.
For.
Assembly Member O'Connell.
Against.
Assembly Member Pigeon.
For.
Assembly Member Prince. Assembly Member Prince. I believe Assembly Member Prince has left the call. Assembly Member Qureshi.
For.
Assembly Member Russell.
For.
Assembly Member Dr. Sahota.
For.
Deputy Chairman Assembly Member Arbour.
Against.
And the Chair Assembly Member Shah.
For.
That is 15 votes in favour and 6 votes against. Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. We move on to motion in the name of Assembly Member Barry. Whilst you introduce the motion, there's also an amendment, as you know. If you can indicate if you are content to accept the amendment or not. So, Assembly Member Barry, it's over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start by introducing my my motion. I'd like to thank, first of all, my Assembly Member colleague Andrew Boff for seconding the motion and introduce this important topic. It's been very common to see in the news talk of a lost generation, children, young people who haven't been able to attend lessons, aspiring students who didn't get to go to university or have gone there and been isolated from friends and family. These are forever lost milestones of growing up and taking your place in the world. We've been rightly concerned about the effects of the pandemic on the young, their well-being and on their futures. And we've seen parents and teachers across the city making heroic efforts to get our young back into schools and universities. And it's only right that we act in a similar manner for the most vulnerable under 25s. We need to make sure that London's young homeless people get the specialist support they need to make it through the tough winter ahead. Now, I commend the Mayor for securing tens of millions of pounds in new funding and for going the extra mile to make sure homeless Londoners are protected from the cold this winter, and the work that they've been doing in the GLA to bring people into hotels as well. And we now need to push on and make sure that these services work the best they possibly can. And I mean push on and set aside funds within these budgets for suitable accommodation for under 25s. What we've seen is the number of young people living on the streets rising by 47% this year in the last quarter compared with the same time last year. They're now 11% of our city's homeless people. And although I believe there are some dedicated beds dotted around the hotel scheme in the Mayor's programmes, along with some dedicated youth support. This simply doesn't match the 368 young people who have been made homeless between July and September alone this year, and this number grows all the time. So we do need more dedicated space. Even more concerning are the real stories behind these statistics. I've met with youth workers from homeless charities for young people, heard from the badly affected boroughs, and there you've got outreach workers saying there are young people bedding down in parks for the first time. Informal support, the kind of friends and family who put them up, that's become impossible in the pandemic. And this is the first time a lot of these young people have been made homeless and left with nowhere to turn. The research I've carried out via YouGov found thousands and thousands of Londoners who would normally do their bit to put somebody up, a friend or a friend of a friend or a friend of their children who would need help. They would normally put them up on sofas and spare rooms. They've had to close their doors because of the pandemic rules. So yes, winter's going to be uniquely hard. Young people are facing the prospect of sleeping on the streets in higher numbers than we've seen in many years. And by definition, these young people are facing this kind of trauma for the first time. Homelessness has not yet damaged them, but we do know that being without a home is a key adverse experience that does damage people for life. And we can prevent this damage, mitigate it with the right kind of help and the right dedicated services, such as keeping the young people together in accommodation rather than with more experienced rough sleepers, with dedicated support attached from youth and social workers. And I think this is a response rightly provided at a pan-London level. We've heard in the Housing Committee this from boroughs responsible too. That's why this motion calls on the Mayor to lead on this, take targeted action with his own budgets by ring-fencing space and the right proportion of funds for dedicated support for homeless under 25s in London. We know that prevention at the right time is far better than dealing with problems later. I urge you to support this motion. Now, on the amendment we've received from Labour, essentially I'm happy to accept this. What it does is it adds in some news that's come in since the motion was written, which is that the Mayor's Rough Sleeping campaign this winter is specifically raising funds for youth homelessness charities who are doing their best to help as well. That's a good thing. And then it says at the end, it adds the phrase and calls on the government to provide additional funding to support this. This is good. It's an and, it's not a but. What it isn't doing is removing the crux of the matter from this motion, which is that the Mayor should be providing dedicated ring-fence spaces for under 25s. That's the real point of this motion, and that still rings out clearly from the amended draft. So I'm happy to accept the amendment as well.
Thank you. Assembly Member Above, do you want to second the motion?
My right, please.
Okay.
Second, reserve my right. Thank you.
Indeed. Can I invite, I believe the amendment is now moved by Assembly Member Qureshi. Do you want to speak on this motion?
I do, Chair, and I'll cover the ground as quickly as I can. I think there's a lot more consensus than we realise. Chair, even before COVID arrived on these shores to threaten our lives and livelihoods, putting people out of work and more people onto our streets, London had a rough sleeping problem. Nowhere more can you see this acutely than in central London and in our town centres, where those forced to sleep in our streets have become the living reminders of the shameful impact of austerity, the rising cost of living and the falling real wages. Before COVID hit, many of the just about managing had already breached the threshold into not managing through no faults of their own. And then the pandemic came, and those struggling have become worse and are experienced by many more. So I want to thank the Assembly Member Sean Berry for bringing this issue to the centre of our focus today. I especially thank her for the emphasis she has made on youth homelessness. As our motion makes painfully clear, we've had a huge increase in youth homelessness, 47% as she mentioned, when compared with the previous year. My amendment today doesn't seek to take away from the validity of her motion, but instead close the gaps and make it watertight and help to deliver the real change that we will get our fellow Londoners off the streets this Christmas. Some of the action to address rough sleeping this year stands as a shining example of what can be achieved when humility is prioritised over party politics. The Everyone In campaign, presided over by the Mayor, the government and other essential partners, saw thousands of Londoners helped into every emergency accommodation early in the pandemic. Amongst them were 150 people under 25 and 500 people under the age of 35. This action has saved lives. Since then, City Hall has confirmed the battle to tackle youth homelessness. Amongst those measures are the new triage service providing support and accommodation for those who started sleeping rough during the pandemic, capital funding for specialist accommodation for those at risk of homelessness, £40 million homelessness change and platform for life programme will help fund accommodation for young rough sleepers, and on top of which the Mayor's Rough Sleeping campaign will see money raised for charities especially helping young people on the streets. But I fear there remains a missing piece of the jigsaw from this motion, one that could move us from a place of good intention to a place of being able to influence real change. This winter, London only received a quarter of what is needed to tackle homelessness. Without adequate government financial support, many Londoners will be left in peril this winter, despite the best efforts of the people on this Assembly and beyond.
Thank you. Sorry, are you done?
I've just got a few more things to say, Chair.
I'm sorry, your time's up. You've gone over your limit. Sorry, carry on.
Thank you, Chair. So my amendment today seeks to insert the final piece of the jigsaw to ask to join us in putting humanity first, to come forward with the necessary funding and help those young people who also find that they are without that most basic human need, shelter, this Christmas. As we sit in our warm homes this winter, spare a thought for those young Londoners on the streets will not be enough. I, for one, want to be assured that I've done what I can to influence those with the power to end youth homelessness. I believe each of you wanted to be assured of that too. So I ask you to accept my amendment today. Thank you very much, Assembly members.
Thank you, Assembly Member Qureshi. My apology, I took it 3 minutes instead of 5 allocated to you, so sorry about that. Okay, Assembly Member Cooper, you're seconding the amendment. You got 3 minutes if you'd like to speak now, or reserve your right, whatever you want to do. Assembly Member Cooper. Assembly Member Cooper? No? Okay.
Sorry, I turned on my camera rather than on my sound. It's 2 minutes to 6. I'm going to reserve my right and I'm going to move it formally because I'm sure we'd all like to finish quite soon.
Right, okay. I've got 2 indications. I've got Assembly Member Duval who wants to come in. Assembly Member Duval.
Apologies, Chair, that was a mistake.
Right, move on to Assembly Member Sean Bailey.
Chair, thank you. Excuse me. Oh, good grief.
Are we having IT issues?
Unfortunately, 1 second, Chair. I think I can solve them.
Sorry, we lost you again. Assembly Member Bailey. Look, shall we see if I can bring in Assembly Member Cooper? Did you say you were just formally seconding and didn't want to speak?
Chair, as we haven't had any speakers against the motion, and I gathered from what the movers were saying that they were minded to accept our amendment as it's an addition, and they saw it as a helpful addition, I don't think I do need to speak at this point, so I'm just going to continue to formally second the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Assembly Member Bailey on the screen. Do you want to contribute? Assemblyman
Thank you, Chair.
Bailey.
A very short comment.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I think the amendment and some of the comments made around the amendment have made it more political than it needed to be. In the original motion, I think was something that we could have all supported. And now I wonder if the amendment has made it too political. That would be my take, Chair. Thank you.
Right. I think in concluding now, I'm offering, obviously, summing up from Assembly Member Sean Barry, please.
I reserve my right.
Oh, yes, sorry, Assembly Member Boff. Please do come in, and then following that, Assembly Member Barry. Assembly Member Boff.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Greens in contributing to the kind of cross-party working that is so effective when this Assembly gets together and communicates together in a timely fashion. And when you consider how important young people rough sleeping is, how desperate the problem is, it's good that we have a chance to discuss this. You know, on Wednesday we had an Assembly-run meeting putting together lots of workers in the field of rough sleeping to talk about what the effects of COVID-19 were and what messages we could learn from the programs that took place. May I say they were largely successful programs that took place with a record amount of support from the government. And what was most telling about that meeting was the number of people who gave evidence, saying that the most acute problem is for those who are in the most tenuous of circumstances with regard to their homes. It's so vital that young people don't spend that first night out. Don't get used to the idea that the street is their home. It's so important that we put into place programs which can ensure they are not put in that position. But you see, our role as a London Assembly is to hold the Mayor to the account. And I understand what the Labour Party are doing at the last minute, proposing a motion, criticising the government. I can understand that. I can understand them doing it at the last minute, because, of course, that's a tactic. I mean, the one thing I would say to the Labour group is next time you're faced with that silly tactic of sticking in an amendment minutes before a meeting occurs, you've got one of two options. You can try and be slippery, as you have done today, or you can try and be a mensch. And you can talk to the other groups about improving motions that come to this Assembly. It appears there is no subject so important that the Labour group won't hijack in order to plant a political message in it. You know, it's not the government who is in charge of the £530 million underspend that the Mayor has in his affordable housing programme that he could well use to resolve the problems of young people rough sleeping. It's not the government who have failed to review the Mayor's housing programme, despite virtually every single expert in the field saying that he should review them. Indeed, Assemblymember Qureshi's predecessor, Tom Copley, wanted him to review it as well. But that was, of course, before he got the job to prevent a review of the Mayor's housing policies. We must support this motion today. I admit, I accept what the Assemblymember Berry has done in accepting the amendment. I personally wouldn't have done. You're probably all a little bit tired to go through motions. But the next time this comes up, the next time we're considering matters of real importance to London.
Thank you. Can you wind up, please?
Please don't attach a political message and then think you're clever.
Can you wind up, please? Thank you.
Point of information, Chair. That amendment from the Labour group was sent to the Tories and the Greens at 2:45. I want Andrew Boff to withdraw those remarks, because actually not asking the government to chip in a bit more money to an important cause that he supposedly supports is so terrible and so damning of the Labour group. Please.
Assembly Member Duval, thanks for clarification. I need
So
to
I
know.
have been named, Chair. I have been named.
No,
I'm
sure.
not going to withdraw.
I'm not stopping you from speaking. In fact, I'd like you to confirm as well.
You actually got your facts wrong.
I have been named.
No, sure. You can speak.
Facts are
Can
that
you?
It was 2:45 today, not 2:45 last week, not 2:45 the week beforehand, not 2:45 on the day that this motion was proposed by the Greens. It was 2:45 today. Just get your act together.
Chair.
Sorry.
Further point of information, amendments are usually given on the day, not necessarily before. Customer practice.
Okay, look, we have a situation here where the seconder of the main motion is not accepting the amendment. So given that situation, I will be taking two votes.
Chair, I will accept I will be led by Assembly Member Berry on this. I will accept it, but I don't accept anything silently. Thank you.
Look, do we have an agreement on the amendment or not? We have.
I think both I and my seconder will accept the amendment, so we don't need to vote on it, Chair.
Okay, in that case, Assembly Member Barry, do you still have a right to reply as the? Do you want to use that?
Although it's late, I think we've come to a consensus on this, which is good, no matter how difficult. And I think Assembly Member Duval is right there to point out that currently our rough sleeping and homelessness services are funded partly by the Mayor and partly by the government. So it makes sense to ask both of them to chip in and not really put the blame on one or the other. I think it's really important we all work together to deal with this problem. I think as Assembly Member Boff spoke very clearly about, just let no nights out for young people, and you can prevent an awful lot of damage to them. And that's what we need to be aiming for here. We know that more young people are going to be getting into trouble. We know there are fewer people who can help them. And so just getting those services in place, however we can do it, however we can form an agreement, is the right thing to do. So thank you, everybody.
Right. We come to the end of consideration of the motion. We clearly have unanimity on the consolidated motion. So can we agree on?
Sorry, Chair, can you just confirm on that unanimity that Sean Bailey, who I'm naming, is actually going to vote for this motion now? He did indicate during the debate he wasn't. Can we confirm that there is unanimity, that we're all going to vote together?
Do we have an unanimous agreement
or is it too political?
Chair, I've been named, so I'll answer.
Okay.
You should get your facts right. You should get your facts right. You're very busy telling everybody else to get their facts right. I never said I wasn't going to vote for it. What I said was it's been made unnecessarily political. The Greens.
Okay.
It's the first time you've ever done it for a long time. Do you know what I mean?
Shouting at me doesn't make you right. The Greens proposed this. They did it
already.
Look,
Assembly Member Bailey and Assembly Member Duval, can we just move on? We all know what's been agreed now. There is an unanimous agreement.
Go for it.
Yeah. There is an unanimous agreement on the Assembly on this motion, amended motion. So I want to go forward from that and move on to item number 7, which is pay award 2020 to 21 for GLA statutory officers. The Assembly is asked, noting that it is a joint decision with the Mayor to agree that there should be no pay increase for 2021 for the Chief Officer and the Executive Director of Resources, and that the Monitoring Officer allowance awarded to the Assistant Director for External Relations also remains unaltered for 2021. Can I therefore ask the Assembly to agree to this recommendation? Agreed. Date of the next meeting. The next meeting of the Assembly is scheduled to be a virtual Mayor's Question Time meeting, which will take place on Thursday, 17th of December at 10 a.m. Finally, I have no urgent business that I have received, so I conclude this meeting. Have a nice weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.